pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we are absent two members. I have an announcement to make that Rhonda Licio has officially resigned her membership. So we are down two, but only one was expected. We are joined tonight by the BOS, but as I see the membership, I mean, there's a quorum. If you guys would want to wait to your chair.
Wait till 6:35 anyway.
Okay, beautiful. Public comment. Is there any public comment not related to our meeting, our hearing? Seeing none. So we have in accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access and in perpetuity on YouTube. So we have a public hearing tonight for, do we want to start that before the BOS opens
No, I
their
mean, we
meeting?
can wait a couple of minutes. You can
The
get your
chair's
minutes
here.
and
Okay,
Chair, Mr. Alonso's here.
reports and whatnot.
okay. It's not 6:35 yet. Why don't we jump ahead to minutes approval? Minutes of 7:22:19.
Comments on the minutes that are on the agenda?
Nope.
I move we approve the minutes from 7/22/19.
Second?
Excellent. Any further? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. 6:32 still. Why don't we go to committee reports? Capital Planning has not begun meeting yet. Stormwater Task Force, we met briefly a week or two ago to discuss our public outreach. We put together, I believe it was 14 questions to be put up on SurveyMonkey. And Agricultural Commission, we have not met since our last meeting. However, I will say that the farmers market has continued to succeed and thrive and do very well. And I would ask or welcome anyone else to come out to our farmers market on Sundays from 10 to 1 in the center of town in front of the Ritter Building. Open Space Ad Hoc. Committee
We're having another meeting at the end of the month.
Okay. Land Acquisition Committee.
I don't remember. I think we're planning another meeting for that in the beginning of next month.
Okay. Green Communities Task Force.
No report.
Montezut Regional Planning Commission.
No report.
And Rhonda was Montezut Joint Transportation Commission. Why don't we go ahead and let the time tick away till 6:35?
We have another agenda. I don't have an agenda. Oh, I
No, we're just waiting for everybody to get here to start the Unitil. We'll just join. So.
Okay.
Unless there was anything else. Are we on air? Doesn't look like it.
That's a manual switch, so
Okay.
whether it's on or not, we can be on the air. And if it's on, we can be off the air. Here's your 6:35.
And I would like to welcome the Select Board and
Tree warden.
and the Tree Warden, and ask that the Board of Selectmen, would you like to open your meeting?
Sure, at 6:35, I'll open our meeting.
Excellent. So we have all gathered here today for a public hearing for Unitil, the Storm Resiliency Program, pruning, cutting of shade trees.
All right. Town of Lunenburg, public hearing. The Lunenburg Planning Board and Lunenburg Tree Warden will hold a public hearing on August 12th, 2019, 6:35 PM, Town Hall, 17 Main Street, Lunenburg, Mass., to hear and review a request to prune and/or remove trees through the storm resiliency program along Leominster Road from West Street to Lancaster Avenue and along Lancaster Avenue from Massachusetts Avenue to Rolling Acres under MGL Chapter 40, Section 15C, scenic road designations, and under MGL Chapter 87, Section 3, cutting of public shade trees. Subject trees range from 8 inches to 30-plus inches and consist of the following species: maple, red pine, Norway spruce, silver maple, red maple, sugar maple, cherry, elm, Norway maple, hemlock, sycamore maple, European beech, ginkgo, black locust, magnolia, white pine, spruce, ash, hickory, oak, and red oak. Owners are the town of Lunenburg and various private entities. Applicant is Unitil, 357 Electric Avenue, Lunenburg, Mass. 01462. The storm resiliency program is available for viewing in the planning office.
Excellent. I would welcome representatives. Come up.
Hello,
Good evening.
John DiNapoli, Municipal and Community Service Manager for Unitil. We're here tonight to review, discuss, and hopefully receive approval for our storm resiliency program, which you have in front of you this evening. With me tonight, I have Ms. Sarah Sankowicz, our Manager of Forestry Operations and Sustainability. I have Dave Clapham, Forestry Supervisor, and also with us is Alec O'Meara, our Media Relations Manager. Before turning it over to Sarah, I wanted to provide you with a little background about Sarah and Dave. Our forestry programs are overseen by our system arborist, Sarah Sankowicz, who's here. Her credentials include past president of the Utility Arbor Association, current vice president of the New England chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, ISA. She's a certified arborist through ISA. Dave, our forestry supervisor, is here for our North Central Mass territory. He is also ISA certified, as well as a tree risk assessment qualification through the ISA. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Sarah, who's our professional in anything relating to trees.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having us here today. So we wanted to come before you to take a look at the trees that were marked and slated for pruning or removal as part of our storm resiliency program. We've been here before and talked about the program. Just as a little bit of a recap, this program is over and above our normal pruning program. We are doing work for storm resiliency specifically because of reliability related issues on this particular circuit that feeds this section of Lunenburg. So we are just looking to see whether or not this program is a good fit for your scenic road areas in town. Did you want to walk through? Did we want to have particular questions?
Any preference? Otherwise, I'd leave it up to the applicant.
I have a number of specific questions. I don't know if you want to go through the overview and then I can go to the specific questions, or how you'd like
It may
to.
benefit our guests for the overview.
Okay,
first.
great.
Yeah?
Okay. So the certified arborist that works in the area, Dave, he went through and he marked individual trees that pose a risk to the electric lines. The risk could be structurally unstable, or it could be a biological issue with the tree. So every tree was individually assessed, and we provided the assessment form for each tree. We also provided a list of trees that are privately owned but will be pruned as part of the program that extend out into the right-of-way. I did want to note that every customer adjacent to the public trees was spoken with, and if there was opposition from that particular customer about the tree being removed, we tried to work through that and removed the tree off the list if possible and looked for alternatives to removal. So this list includes most all of the customers having given approval. There were a few that were still in negotiations with the customer for their private trees, but for the most part, we had good response from all the customers that live adjacent to those trees. So the packet that was provided gives a little bit of an overview of our storm resiliency program. So there's a section that is on the scenic roads that extends for 2.5 miles on Leominster Road down Lancaster that will have ground to sky pruning and will have removals. And then past that point, we'll just be looking at removals, and those are not in the scope of what we're talking about today, but that will be future work. So the section that's before us today deals with from Leominster Road to Lancaster, stopping at Rollstone. Rolling Acres, yeah. Which was what was put in the hearing. So after the overview, we have a full list of all the public and private trees that are to be removed. There are 32 public trees that we are looking for removal tonight. Then after that, each individual tree has a list of the size, the species, and an overview note of why the tree is being removed, such as structural integrity, root system damage, decay, weak branching, and so on. And then after that, we provided the individual full tree risk assessment form. As last meeting we were asked to fill out a full assessment form that any arborist could review. It follows the International Society of Arboriculture risk assessment form. So you'll see how that was all filled out by Dave if there are any questions on any specific trees.
Very good, thank you. Does Jack have a copy of this as well?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't I ask the Board of Selectmen have, you want to go first?
I just had, sorry, go ahead.
No, I have some general, I have questions about specific trees, so I don't know how
I
you.
just had one question. Have you talked to the Board of Selectmen yet?
We have not.
So they're tree owners? So they haven't given you any kind of opinion yet as owners of the trees on their property?
No, that's why we're here.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Presentation.
All right,
We just talked to adjacent landowners.
okay.
We started off with the planning board.
Okay.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a copy of everything? Okay.
But we don't have a map. I mean, I don't know.
We don't have a map either.
I mean, we have the one of the whole thing, but, I mean, I just circled where they
That was
chose
gonna be
the
my
stuff.
first question, so I'm glad we're getting to that first. It would be nice to know where all these trees are on the map, instead of
Yep.
having to search out the addresses of everything.
That's the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, not.
It's not specific. It doesn't show the trees, it just shows the area.
And I'd also like to see the trees ribboned so that we can go
They-
around and look and see. I mean, if taking down a tree is a
They,
big
they
deal.
did, they marked them all.
They
And
are.
they all have a,
They all had they'll have
All the
11
white ones are slated to be taken down.
And they all had an 8.5 by 11 posting of the hearing stapled to them.
so you could take this notice and you could walk or drive down the road. Each pole number is labeled, and it also has an address, and you can view every single tree as you go down the road.
So I have a question. The 32 trees in the public way, you said it goes from Leominster Road to Rolling Acres? So all 32 of those trees are in that small stretch?
Yes. That's correct.
And so ultimately, would it end up looking like the size of the road in Townsend?
No, so
They
each
have
tree was
microphones?
individually reviewed, structural stability or biological functioning. And so each area is different. If the trees are in good health, they may remain and just be pruned.
I'm sorry, can you take
Yeah,
the mic out of
yeah.
the stand?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's right, you guys don't have any microphones.
No, they don't have any microphones, so people at home can't hear what
Right.
they're saying.
Do you want to recess for a minute? So we don't just sit here?
So in terms of Townsend and
But if you can wait till you
Yeah.
have a microphone.
I'd make a
I
motion
can-
that we recess for 5 minutes until the problem's solved.
Second?
All right. All in favor of the recess?
Aye.
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 Aye. recessed. Also, I didn't mention it before, there's a sign-up sheet for the public hearing. If anybody is not signed up, would you please do so? I believe it's in front of Mr. Jeffries.
Plug in the wires. Right.
Green. All right, are we good? All right, we can resume?
Make a motion to go back into open session?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Back in session.
Okay, so I was just wondering about Townsend, because a lot of their roads have had all of their trees removed, and it, to me, doesn't look friendly. And so what type of program are they under in terms of all that removal? Because that's the first thing that came to mind.
Correct, yeah. In Townsend, we did do the storm resiliency program as well. However, the conditions in each area are different. So depending on the health of their trees and the access to the trees, how closely grouped they were together, changes the dynamic of how many trees need to be removed. So if a tree is grown in an open area and it has prevailing winds, it is less likely to have wind throw risk if another tree around it is removed. However, if it's in a dense forested area and you remove a lot of trees, those trees behind it have a risk to fall. So when you have a really densely wooded area, sometimes you have to remove multiple trees because of the risk that's left behind from removing one tree. Also, with equipment access to some of those trees, there's differences in the numbers of trees that have to be removed. So each area is very different. We do a prescription by prescription basis so that we are fully evaluating each tree on its own, whether or not it needs to have any removal done. So to say it's going to look exactly like what Townsend looked like is not a correct statement. Are there going to be larger number of trees removed than normal? The program is the same. Yes, it is the storm resiliency program. That is correct. Yeah. So our job is to make sure that in a storm event, we are leaving as little risk as possible around the electric wire so that in a storm we can get the power lines restored and we can get customers restored more quickly, that the access routes in a storm are available to be used. Okay. It is a large amount of trees that are being removed, but keeping your trees healthy adjacent to the roadway and the power line corridor will help chances of them not having to be removed in the future. So we are offering tree growth regulator application, which is a tool in the bucket to try to help those trees that will be remaining to have less stress and have better chances of not becoming a hazard tree in the future. So we are looking at trying to encourage private homeowners of trees to take care of their trees so they don't become a hazard and that they can safely coexist with the power lines. And we would love to work with Lunenburg on any other possibilities for tree care, such as in the common of any of those trees that will be remaining so that they don't become a hazard and we don't have to talk about removing them in the future.
I have a question for you. A few questions, just really two. The first is, all the people that are listed as to be determined, what does that mean for the purpose of this conversation? Because it's quite a bit.
I'll have Dave answer that one since he's the one that marked all the trees.
There's 12 trees on the list that we currently do not have full permission for, and we will not remove those trees unless we have full permission from the adjacent landowners.
Okay. My next question is a comment first, and then it's a question. So I drove down Leominster Road, which I drive down Leominster Road pretty often, and it's pretty overgrown. So what I'm having a hard time understanding here is that Unitil, which I presume is a state-of-the-art company, is how tree line management, or rather power line management, has gotten this bad, right? I mean, quite bluntly, it seems that as a business strategy, that it's more cost-effective to do it this way than to do routine pruning. I mean, the condition of Leominster Road, it's quite awful. And so now we're at the point where, because of maintenance not occurring, now it's on the other extreme of it, which is, let's cut all these trees down and let's bring everything back to full health. And then we're gonna probably maintain a great program, and we're gonna make sure the new trees are good, but the reality is 10 years from now, we're gonna be sitting here having the same conversation again. So I am not by any stretch in favor of any of this. I am a hard no. But I'm very curious today as to,
I'd like to just address one thing, if I could.
Well, let me get to my question.
Okay.
So what I'd like to understand is, as you guys, as you plan this, so that way when we do have another catastrophic storm that everyone's not out of power for 2 weeks.
Not for catastrophic. We're only talking about a major storm event.
For a major storm event, that people aren't out of power for 2 weeks. What I'm very curious about is what has been your plan for the last 10 years for tree maintenance?
I'm happy to answer that. So I came on with Unitil in 2011, and I started a state-of-the-art vegetation management program. So you probably have seen a lot of the pruning that's occurred in town. So we are on a 5-year cycle, which is based on an assessment of growth in the area, so predominant tree growth, the clearance to be attained at time of clearing, and a field survey. So we had a consultant company come in and take a look at that and recommend our cycle. And we do spot checks every year to make sure that happens. So we are on a 5-year cycle, and in some cases we've gone to a 4-year cycle if we've noticed that it's been overgrown. So we are within our 5-year cycle, and things do grow back. And as long as there's less than 10% of our vegetation touching the wires, we consider that a success. And that's because outages do not occur from vegetation touching the lines. It occurs from tree failure and limb failure falling into the lines. And really the problem becomes when private tree owners, or even some of the public trees, we don't get the permission to do the pruning and removal like we would like to. So we have a large number of refusals or light trims along our scenic roads, and in the past we have not gotten our full specification. We did not push coming in to get our full 10 feet of clearance because we had come through before and it was already drastic pruning, and we wanted to see how that would work. But unfortunately, we found that the circuit was not performing as well as some of our other ones because of the refusals and the restricted trimming on the scenic roads. So it became our poor performing feeder. And so that initiated that fact that we would have to do some reliability related work on the circuit. So this work that we're talking about is not related to cycle pruning. That is continuing as normal. We are going to continue to do cycle pruning. It has nothing to do with cycle pruning. If we decide today that the storm resiliency program is not for us in the town of Lunenburg, we will still continue with our cycle pruning. So it has absolutely nothing to do with that.
So what you're saying then is that when I look at roads like Leominster Road and the people who live on Leominster Road, that road is within your, because I mean we're at the end of the season now, so I mean that road is within tolerance then, is that what you're telling me?
Some of the areas where we have refusals are not. They will be touching the lines, but we don't have rights to go and just do whatever we want. If the adjacent homeowner is refusing to allow us to do work there, then we cannot cut there.
So essentially, just so I can understand what you're saying, this is all the same question here. So as I drive down Leominster Road, I can presume then that all the trees that are growing through lines, all the lines that are hidden inside of trees, all the vines that are growing all over the lines, which, I can presume then that all those have been maintained within the last 4 to 5 years, and that all the ones that are overgrown are the fault of the homeowner.
So we have to be careful what lines we're talking about. So we are talking about
We're talking about power
primary
lines.
overhead lines.
Yep.
So those are at the top of the power lines. I know Dave wants to say something. 1 second. There are communication lines that do not hold a voltage that's considered, dangerous, where we don't have to clear the same amount from those. So those are not included in what we're talking about having vines. And there's guy wires and other things like that, which are our assets, which may have vegetation around them, but are not cleared at the same distances because it's not a safety hazard. But every single line has been pruned within the last 4 to 5 years on that circuit, and I'll let Dave add.
I believe you're talking about from Sunny Hill Road down to the town line.
Correct.
That area was pruned in 2015. We only pruned it, we didn't do any flat cutting. So that's the response growth, because when we pruned it, basically, which we don't like to do, we ended up topping everything. So when you top it, and it was done in the early spring before leaf out, it pushed leaf out. And all that stored energy in the root system pushed all that new growth out. So that's why it's so overgrown. And it's due, we actually have it on schedule this year. We just haven't had a chance to go through the whole process because we wanted to we didn't want to confuse everyone with SRP versus regular pruning. So it is on the agenda to get done this year, if that helps.
It does. So 5 years, I mean, I think what we are saying then, from what we all can observe, is that 5 years probably isn't frequent enough.
It is. 5 years works extremely well in most of our districts. And there's a couple spots, Leominster Road, the Reservoir, Lancaster area doesn't work well on. 4 years is a stretch for it, because the amount of growth we're getting.
So that's why we have chosen to do some areas within 4 years. So we recognize that there are some cycle buster areas, and depending on the type of, rain we have and growth, you can have things that push the cycle. So we do make sure we monitor that and get out there in a timely fashion. And we will continue to do that and make sure that our lines are well maintained from a vegetation management standpoint into the future. This program is talking about a risk related to storms, and we're not talking about catastrophic, where if we have a hurricane, direct impact on us, there's going to be people without a power. If we have a tornado, those kinds of things. But if we have some heavy snow or we have thunderstorms, heavy rain, we're hoping that the circuit will perform much better in those circumstances. Or even if we do have a larger storm than that, that the duration of time that people will be out will be less, and there won't be panic because people are without power for 3 or more days and they can't find shelters or anything like that. We would hope that the major arteries of town would be up, so the lifeline, life safety and community resources would be up and running, so people could at least go to a shelter, they could at least get gas for a generator, get some food, and it wouldn't be the mass panic, even if it took longer to restore individual homes. So that's the idea of just doing that main artery for the storm resiliency program. And we're really here today just to find out whether or not that's appropriate on the scenic road. We've been mandated by the Public Utility Commission to take a look at our worst performing feeders and do something about it. And the reason that it's having problems is because of tree-related issues. So that's why we're here today. If we decide that that's not appropriate for town and we don't want it to be done, we will still continue with all of our regular vegetation management work and our regular maintenance pruning.
When you talk about performance of the circuit, are you talking about the number of outages? Is that what performance of the circuit in your
Correct.
terminology is? Okay.
Yeah, so we look at average number of interruptions, the duration of the outages, like that.
So can you speak to that, the differential between that circuit that you're targeting and the rest of your circuits?
I don't have that information with me, but it's been on our worst performing, it's the worst circuit on all of our Massachusetts circuit list for 3 years in a row. And I do have the number of outages related to trees for the past years, if you're interested in that.
Sure.
So in 2018, we had 34 tree-related outages. In 2017, we had 23, and in 2016, we had 23.
What is that for?
Just for that circuit.
Just for that circuit?
Just for this circuit we're talking about. So some of them...
Sorry to interrupt, but what do you consider an outage? The entire circuit being out?
No, so that could range from anything from the entire circuit being out and all customers being out to just one customer being out. The duration statistics take into account how many customers are out for how long of a period of time. So that's one of the factors that go in.
All of those related to trees?
Yes. So there were more outages than that. Those were related to broken limbs, broken trunk, uprooted tree, those kinds of things.
And how does that, those numbers are just floating on their own. How does that compare to a circuit with, how many trees cause problems in another circuit?
Well, it is based on mileage, so the more miles you have, the tree numbers of events per mile changes. So we have some circuits that have 0 tree-related outages per mile because they're
trees.
small. They're small circuits, so the likelihood of trees. So it does range by circuits, and that's why those specific reliability statistics are how we measure performance. And so in the number of tree-related outages and the duration of outages was high for an average circuit. And we can certainly provide some more of those reliability statistics if you're interested.
Have you done the storm resiliency program elsewhere in town, or is the other trimming I've seen just your regular trimming program?
We have, yep, we did storm resiliency work on the other circuit in Lunenburg that feeds the other half of town.
How many circuits are there in Lunenburg?
3, 5? So there are 2 major circuits, and then there are other circuits that serve a portion of other towns and portions of Lunenburg. So there's 5.
Is the circuit you're talking about here a major circuit?
Yes.
Does it have a lot of miles?
Yes.
The circuit is about 35 miles, and it covers just over 1,200 customers.
Is it on the map?
Yes, I believe it is.
So this map, the whole map, is all of the circuit. So it's labeled F30W30. That's the name of the circuit. We're only choosing to do the portion that feeds the most customers. So the way that power works is that if a tree were to fail in any of those areas right outside of the substation, all of the customers on this circuit would be without power. There are protection devices as you get farther down, so if a tree were to fall farther down here, it would open a protection device and it would only be a portion of the circuit that is without a power. So we're targeting the area where if a tree were to fall, all the customers would be without power. So all the customers that are served off of this would see benefit from removing those trees and not having an outage.
When you mentioned that this circuit has a lot of outages, does it have a lot of outages compared with circuits of similar size? Because you're talking about comparing circuits that are small and circuits that are big, which doesn't quite seem fair to me.
The reliability indices take into account the size of the circuit. So like events per mile, customers interrupted per event, those would take into account the size of the circuit. So even though the circuit is large, it gets compared proportionally to other circuits as well.
But just large circuits or to all the circuits?
All the circuits.
So that doesn't seem, so that paints an inappropriate picture.
No, so the way the metrics work is it takes into account the size and normalizes it for the size so that they can all be compared to each other. So when it's compared to a smaller circuit, the only thing that would really change it would be like density of trees and things like that, because if you had a circuit that didn't have any trees versus a circuit that did, then the tree-related outages could be different. So it doesn't take into account tree density, but it does take into account size of circuit. So like we have large circuits in Ashby and Townsend, and it takes a look at overall tree-related based on the size of the circuit. So even related to those large circuits, this has a worse performance.
Is that because it has more trees?
No, it has more tree-related interruptions.
But does it have more trees?
No.
So my question, because I don't have the data that you're talking about, I mean, how much, when you talk about worse, I mean, is it the next step? Is it wildly worse?
It's comparing it to ourselves. So out of all the circuits that we have, it is the worst of our circuits. It doesn't compare to other areas' reliability. So it is the worst of our circuits for reliability.
Right, but you have indices that you talk about.
Correct.
So, I mean, let's say it was a scale of 1 to 100. I don't know what scale you're using. If it's 1 to 100 and this one was, the worst, the higher being worse. This one was a 70, but the one next to it was like a 60.
Right.
That's marginally worse. If this one was really an outlier, like...
Unfortunately, the Public Utility Commission mandates us to take a look at the worst performing circuit, whether or not it's just a tiny bit worse or
I understand what they're
Are you saying the
I'm
worst
asking
in
you.
Lunenburg?
I'm asking for you.
Sorry? Oh, sorry.
Is it worse? How much worse is it?
I don't have that information with me right now.
Okay.
the engineers do all of that planning and decide what to do. We've had a lot of meetings looking at, what's the most appropriate action to take. And after all of that planning with people above me and other departments, it was decided to do the vegetation management program. And so that's where we come in. I don't have all the specific reliability indices. That's not exactly my analysis forte.
Understood. But it is an important factor for us because
I understand.
they both have, they both are under the scenic bylaw, so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it helps to put it in perspective, there were 34 related tree outages last year. So customers saw an average of, that was how the sum of customers interrupted related to trees.
Can you quantify that in time?
Yeah, so
Or
let's
something
see.
different than
I don't have
just
it all added
outages?
up, but, so for like tree broken limb, the sum of customers interrupted was 1,905, and the sum of the minutes of interruption were 389,094. So
Of
that
total
takes
customers
duration.
per year.
Yeah, so that's the minutes of customers over time. That's just for broken limb. And then if you look at like broken trunk, it's 1,962 sum of customers interrupted and 52,824 minutes of interruption.
And how many circuits did you say we had?
We have two major ones in
So this is the
Lunenburg,
worst of two?
and there's 3 other small ones. It's actually the worst of all of our circuits in Massachusetts.
No, but you keep saying we have 2 circuits and this is the worst one, so it's the worst of our 2 overall circuits.
It's also the worst of-
Somebody's got to be the worst, it doesn't mean it's bad.
We're also the worst of all of our circuits in Massachusetts. So
But
when
you're
we
not
talk
able to
about-
quantify that. You're saying you don't know how much worse.
And
So
I don't really
that's-
want to compare ourselves to other towns because rural versus city and stuff, we really can't get into that. I mean, in terms of apples and oranges, but we
Right.
keep saying it's the worst circuit, but it's the worst of 2, so I think it's
There's
important
actually
to point
5,
that
but
out.
some of them are partially served.
Okay, 2 full circuits,
2
and this
full
is the worst of the 2 full.
Right, but we have multiple circuits, in other towns, and the way the Public Utility Commission looks at overall service quality of Unitil, and this circuit is the worst of all of our service territory. It's not
so
just
I'm
the
gonna-
worst.
If I may, Mr.
in
Chair, I just
Lunenburg.
want to make a final thought. I think what we're dealing with this topic, because it's a scenic roadway, is more a matter of personal preference than data. I think from Unitil's perspective, having no trees around the wires is clearly easier for Unitil and for the wires. A circuit, you said, will be better if the trees are removed from it. That makes complete sense. I don't think I think you've explained it well, but it makes sense on its own. At the very beginning, when you opened, you said that when you do the storm resiliency plan, it's over and above our normal pruning. That was something that you had said. And I don't want to see over and above normal pruning on a scenic roadway. Sometimes driving around, that's sort of, electricity has its benefits and nobody wants it to be out, but I think of, I don't know if it's in Lancaster or Bolton, but there's a stretch there on 117 where the trees are like, and that's one of my favorite places to drive because you're in the trees. And so if it was better for some reason to remove all of those, then it wouldn't be better for the drive. So I look at it, there's a lot of nice historic homes, and it was designated a scenic roadway for a reason. It might not be to the extent of Townsend, but I was sort of alarmed when those trees started to be removed. So I guess instead of we could talk about data and it's all pretty gray, especially because it's the worst of 2 circuits. I think that sort of sums it up for me, is that I don't think we place a vote here. What do we do?
Well, we haven't gotten you to that point.
No,
And
but
by the way,
I'm asking what our role is here, because it says.
Well, we're
votes
eventually going to be
immediately.
asked to approve it.
Yeah, so we're looking for approval.
No, I'm asking though,
we
the
have-
process. Is it us
Pardon me.
plus planning?
We haven't had a chance to comment, and you guys even haven't had the chance to
Review
speak
all the
as-
data.
or to speak as tree owners. I mean, they've approached every other property owner that has trees from the list. It appears that the town owns
Well, that's
an
my
abundance of
question
them.
is, Heather,
And
what is
just-
our
may I
role
finish,
here?
Katie?
Sure.
And from a procedural standpoint and from a communication standpoint, I think we both, it's failed us miserably. Was the town informed? Were they sent a
We've had
notification?
multiple meetings.
No,
Yeah.
with us, but the town is landowners and is tree owners. Were
That's
they
why we
notifi-
approached you
they-
months
but
ago.
I'm saying, when you mailed out the green cards, was the town notified as a property owner?
We didn't mail any green cards.
They didn't have to?
No.
Okay.
When the original application was filed at the beginning of July. You received.
I'm just saying we could have avoided a lot of this discussion.
Okay, you
if
asked,
they-
you asked to be
okay, I'm
let
sorry.
finish.
Okay, sorry.
Let me answer your question. You were sent this and the data sheets from all of the trees back in July when they were filed.
Right.
As was the Board of Selectmen and the town manager and the tree warden, all under the same cover, with an explanation of what Unitil had proposed, what the public hearing was. So this is all the information that the town had. And so it was communicated, the town manager and I spoke about it when they first came in, and I said, when we have the information, I will send it around to the Board of Selectmen. So it was, now granted, it was right after the 4th of July holiday. It's easily understandable that they all probably get a lot of email, and it's easy to get confused in there, but it was distributed to all those who would have stake in the game at the time that it was put forward.
Okay.
I mean,
And again, I'm
This
not
is our
speaking against
multiple-
you in any way that you anyway didn't do anything right. I'm saying from the people that sit
right.
behind these
We
tables,
approached you way in
we
advance.
should have communicated more amongst ourselves, and a lot of this could have been resolved by them inviting you to a Board of Selectmen's meeting
Sure.
from July, 7th until now.
Yeah, we
and just
approached
sped up the
you,
process. No, I
just
understand
talking
that.
about how to proceed with this work. I mean, we're looking to get work done, and we're still really
again,
here
I
to
just-
find out if this is a good fit. If it's
again,
not,
just
we
to-
just need a letter saying that we don't want it to be done.
Okay.
And then it's finished.
So, and again, sorry, so into Katie's point, have you received any approval from the landowner, our Board of Selectmen, on any of those trees?
We have not received any response after sending that out.
But they
If I
were
may.
informed, you said, we're gonna, just like
Correct.
every other abutter, you said, we're gonna cut down your trees? Okay.
I specifically talked to landowners about the trees and presented what I wanted to do and went from there, which was,
I understand,
A lot
but the
of times
intent
it
was
was-
I mean, we clearly stated, with all the trees marked were slated for removal. All that list of trees says removal, removal, removal. So that means you're gonna cut down the trees. I was just curious if the Board of Selectmen had any interest in having that conversation earlier, so that as landowners and as tree owners, they could be extended that same courtesy, but,
Before it gets to this list, there is a lot of communication with the abutting landowners.
okay.
So you don't see every single thing that potentially had a mark on it. This is after discussion
Okay.
with landowners. So everything you see here was adjacent landowners. However, the public owners, this is the process to follow for
Okay.
public landowner approval. So we are here now seeking approval from
And their
the public
purview is to
landowners.
approve whether or not they want the trees on public land to be removed,
That is correct.
and not for the storm resiliency plan to be implemented via scenic route. That is our purview. Sorry. Go ahead.
If I may.
Yes, please.
So the role of the selectmen, there's two Mass General laws that apply for this hearing. There's the Scenic Road Mass General Law, which requires the public hearing process with the planning board and the tree warden, and the public shade trees, which is in accordance with Mass General Law 87, Section 3, which the tree warden grants the permission for removal or cutting of trees. But if there's any objections by one or more persons in writing, then the selectmen have to make that approval.
Have there been any objections in writing?
I know of none
I have not received
in
any.
And
writing.
what's the time window?
It just, the law states one or more,
By when?
yeah, it doesn't say owners of.
Okay, so
yeah.
one or more objections of a tree requires the Board of Selectmen to get involved with that tree?
With the approval of the removal, yes,
Public
or
request.
cutting
So
of
it's
the
before the
shade
meeting,
trees.
so we posted it for 2 weeks, so you have that entire time to, in writing, submit.
Yeah. But doesn't.
It was posted for a month because we
preclude.
were aiming for the 22nd, and that didn't work out, so.
So this joint hearing was so everyone could hear the same information at the same time.
So for the
And-
public trees, the public 32 trees, who in the town gets to decide
The tree warden,
alone?
alone.
Unless there's
Unless
objections.
there's at or before this hearing, a submission in writing objecting.
I think we
Which
should
could
have
be from a
explained
board
that to the
member.
public.
Yeah.
I feel like the cart got before some sort of horse here, and the reason I started asking my questions is what our role here. I feel like obviously this should have been on an agenda. So when the planning board said we were submitted this and whatnot, if it's not on our agenda at a meeting, we could not have had talked about it legally. So this is our first legal opportunity to talk about this topic. That's why I said, what's our role here? What's our process? And obviously, we should have had a role in this and a role in communicating far before tonight. But I can submit something in writing if that's what I need to do. I mean,
And, you know, the public really wasn't really there.
to who?
So the Mass Chapter 87 law is not new. We have done that before. Trees have been posted. We've got approval to do it. So this is just a larger quantity of trees, but it's not a new law that was enacted. So, I mean,
No, but it's a
public should be
sensitive area.
aware.
We should have been able to say in the paper or on air that if you have an issue with this, please write us a letter, which I don't think anybody ever did that.
okay.
We didn't
I
even
see
know
your
we
point,
could.
yeah.
You guys send out bills. I mean, did you put any leaflet in anyone's bill that says, hey, if you know, we're doing this, here's a public hearing, if you have an objection,
Just read.
X, Y, and did you do
The
that?
bill leaflets go to every customer. It's really not an appropriate use of the bill, and we encourage paperless as well. So we do have stuff posted on our website about the storm resiliency program.
Yeah, but I've seen that.
Yeah, and, you know, I made myself available for meetings prior to this. My name is posted with any of those.
So the answer is
certainly.
no. So I mean,
No.
in the process, if we don't today agree to this process, as I understand what you said, the state requires you to do this. You guys give us a really unpalatable plan. We say no, and then you go back to the state and say, hey, they don't want it, so what do you do then? Move on, basically?
Yeah, I mean, we have a requirement to serve customers with safe and reliable electric service. So that's the reason we're here. If you
But-
decide
but
that it's not.
If we think that your
Excuse me,
plan
let me-
tonight is not necessarily, I mean, 32 trees is hard to stomach. I mean, out of curiosity, well, I'm not going to ask
Do
the
you know how
question,
many
but
trees you have
We
along
have
your?
thousands, tens
Right.
of thousands of trees
So
in our
what
town.
percentage of trees have to be
I
removed?
think, what percentage of your power is clean energy? So you're,
I
so
cannot
you're
answer
offering to
that.
cut down trees in exchange for your power going, I'm not trying to argue, but what I'm trying to say is
There are
that
many
there's an
customers that rely on safe and reliable electric service, and that's the only reason we're here. If you feel that it's not worthwhile, then we go back to the Public Utility Commission, we say it's not an option for the town, and then we start the discussion from there.
I think
You know,
that
if
there
a
is an
tree does
option, but maybe
fall-
it's not this extreme.
And I need to say that I understand the need to maintain trees and trim them and make sure they stay in good, safe operating condition. That's safe even just for dead limbs shouldn't be on the trees because they can just fall on people and cars to begin with.
Right, yep.
But trimming the trees and keeping them healthy is completely different in my eyes to what this storm resiliency program is. And I gotta say, just from looking around town, I don't have to look any further than out my front window to see examples of your other cutting projects, and I have to say, I'm not impressed by any of them. Just the topping of trees and leaving them to die, or cutting every branch on one side of a tree to leave it to die, just looks terrible. And I go around and say, what were they thinking when they did that? So I don't want to subject the center of our town to that same treatment.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Bertram has been.
I understand that. This is the first time that the Board of Selectmen has had input, and that is why I've let it go on so long. But we apparently have the need to interrupt with our own questions.
Momentarily.
I have a couple of things to say. First of all, you submitted a tremendous volume of information, and I went through every bit of it. It was extremely difficult to correlate. Trying to correlate this graph to this and then to this was very, very difficult. It would be extremely helpful moving forward if you had one spreadsheet with the data or with the key elements of the form versus trying to, I literally was flipping sheets constantly. There are no page numbers, and on the sheets, there's no pole number for most of these trees. So trying to correlate the tree with the data that you provided, I couldn't figure out, okay, this one's a Norway, which description is this? So it was extremely difficult to correlate. So I did the best that I could, literally spent well over an hour just trying to figure out what trees you were talking about.
Thank you for the feedback.
So the other thing is that I understand you need this for the storm resiliency program. However, and we've talked about your need to either gain approval or not gain approval, what I really want to talk about before we get into any specifics or further this discussion is the potential liability for the tree owner. You have now done this tree assessment. You've told us that we need to remove it. What is the liability exposure to the town of Lunenburg should we fail to remove it? Can you talk about that specifically?
I can't answer that question. You're going to have to talk to your own legal counsel for your
What is
liability.
Unitil's position?
We'll get an inherent threat letter. That's what they said at the last
Okay,
meeting.
and what does that inherent threat letter mean? I want to understand, because that may be what they told us. I think it's important that the selectmen hear from Unitil what the repercussions are. And going through the sheets, all of the trees that you have and that you assessed are considered high impact. As far as liability, I also have concerns. You spoke with the private owners who are affected, but some of them are in fact public trees, and the homeowner has indicated they don't want them to be removed. In that case, if the tree is diseased and needs to be removed, who is liable? Is it the tree owner, or is it the homeowner who has said they don't want the tree removed? So I really want to talk about liability, because you may go back to the state and say, okay, they don't want it, but I don't know that we have a clear understanding of the impacts of not moving forward are. Secondly, a map would be extremely helpful. You've talked a lot about data tonight, about the poor reliability of the circuit, but there's no data associated with that. So I don't believe we've been given the information to make an informed decision. And as I said, trying to correlate these sheets with what tree you're talking about is very, very difficult, and in some cases impossible. Second, another point, on your chart, you talk about tree replacements. You may be removing 5 trees, but you're proposing 1 replacement. Where is that replacement? On what property? What tree is it that you're replacing? What's the species you're replacing it with? What's the height of that tree? Where is it going to be located? Is it going to be located on the public way or on a private property? So there's a lot of information that's missing from this whole packet. I think had we been given all of the information, we could make informed decisions, but quite frankly, we don't have that data tonight to make an informed decision. I understand that some of these trees, based on the assessments that I read, may need to be removed. However, there's not enough data to show us exactly what trees are truly an imminent threat and what the possible repercussions are of not acting.
I'm sorry that the paperwork was hard to follow. That's good feedback for us to know. As we market, it's easy for us to follow by poll number, but I'm understanding that it may be difficult for
if the poll numbers were on the sheet, that would have been one thing, but they're not.
So the individual tree risk assessment sheet is the backup that you requested, filled out, so that if you wanted to have your own arborist take a look at it, it's filled in. So they can stand alone. The first sheet that's in there has all the major pertinent information with all of the poll numbers, and then the backup one, we can put poll numbers in there for you if you'd like. But moving on from that, the intent for the replacements was to talk about a number of trees that we would be giving back to the town, and it would be the town's decision as to where they wanted to put those trees, whether it was a town public or you wanted the private individuals to have them and take care of them. So we had talked a little bit about that last time.
That's not
about
correct,
the program.
based on this sheet. You look at poll number 910, and you have 4 private trees. You're replacing them with 2. Well, those are all private trees.
Yep, so those trees listed under private would go to that private customer. They can put them around their home for energy savings or wherever they would like.
But look at poll number 14-1. You have 2 public trees and 5 private trees. You're proposing 1 replacement tree. Is that a public replacement tree or a private replacement tree?
Would be private.
Well, so to say that you're proposing what public trees? No, you're not. You haven't given us that data.
Yep, we can
You haven't
clarify
given us that.
Yeah.
And there are.
And some of this is just a starting point for discussion. So as far as replacement trees go and the program for that, we had talked about wanting to come up with a program for replacement and care of the scenic road after we do that. So there's certainly more discussion around that. This is more focused on the actual removals, and we can certainly talk more about replacement.
But focusing on the removals, but I mean, if you're going to remove a tree and replace a tree, that's a very different situation than you're just going to remove it and leave it empty. So there's.
Yeah, I mean, we can set a bucket of money aside for removals, and we can decide what size we want and where they go, or we could give individual removals. I mean, that is something we're willing to work on with the town based on what the need is.
Well, and you talked about, I think this data is sadly lacking, quite frankly. There's no page numbers on anything. There's no correlation between the assessment sheets and this. You don't know what's being replaced, what tree's being replaced. It's extremely difficult to follow.
I'm sorry that it's
Impossible.
difficult to follow. It is weeks and weeks of work for Dave to put this together.
And I spent hours and hours trying to go through it.
I
So, believe
understand.
me.
That's why, we did the walkthrough, and we were, hoping to get a feel for what was out there and then have all the data to peruse without potentially looking at every single tree. We can certainly try to clean it up as best as you want. I have some notes about the poll numbers on all of them, and we can make a note of the replacements if they're private or public. We can also add the individual poll numbers on the assessment sheets as well.
The other thing is you said that we had assessment forms for all of them. I don't see one specifically in your description. You talk about the sycamore maple, which is on the common, and you talk about the fact that ideally it would be removed, but because of the significance of the tree, you'd want to try to save that. I don't see an assessment sheet.
I didn't do assessment on it because we weren't doing anything with it. We're not gonna take it out, and we're not gonna touch it.
Okay, so.
Not
Can you
doing
repeat
it.
that? I didn't hear that.
I didn't write an assessment sheet on it because we're not touching the sycamore maple in the center of town.
But it says ideally you'd remove it, but because of the significance of the tree, and it does give a description of the tree, but it doesn't talk, you don't talk about the likelihood of survival. It does talk about the fact that it needs to be monitored. And you talk about putting a grass bed around it, but when you say monitoring, on what schedule? Who monitors it? Do we monitor it? Does Unitil monitor it? So
Yeah, we would not be
there's a-
monitoring any of the trees. So
Okay,
we are
so-
recommending that if, we're not, it's a tree that you would not like to see removed, and we don't want to be pruning it to causing it any other, possible spiral of decline, then monitoring and maintaining any of the trees in the town common would still be the responsibility of the tree owner. So
Okay.
just because Unitil is there pruning trees or removing trees, we still do not own any of the trees.
Okay. I really would like the liability question assessed, because if ultimately the Board of Selectmen decide not to move forward as the public tree owner, and we decide not to move forward from a scenic road perspective, I think it's incredibly important that we understand the potential impact of that. So the two questions are, what is the liability for the town as the public tree owner if you identify it as an inherent risk? What is the liability exposure? Secondly, if a private homeowner who has a public tree on their property refuses to allow you access to remove the tree, what is the liability exposure?
Sure. I encourage you to talk to your own legal representation, and we always encourage homeowners to talk to their own legal representation as well when it comes to, decisions regarding removal of their trees. So that's the first. I can tell you that from a risk-related standpoint of tree work in general, if there are two neighbors with trees, there is case law precedent where if the neighbor has a qualified individual assess the health of the tree and they find that it is a high risk and the adjacent homeowner does not take care of the risk and it does fall and damage a car or property or whatever and cause some damages, the person who did not act on it could be found liable. It would have to be taken to court. So there is some case law related to trees in general. So it is plausible that because we have an asset there, we could be considered a neighbor. However, I personally do not know of any case law from a utility standpoint where this has gone to court.
Do you know what the verbiage is in your inherent risk letter? I'm assuming you're familiar with that.
The letter that we send out goes to individual homeowners, and it basically says that we have identified a tree as a risk. You do not wish to have the tree removed, therefore we require that the homeowner monitor the tree and take any necessary action if the tree needs to be removed. They have been notified of the risk related to the tree, and as certified arborist, as a tree risk assessment qualified arborist, we have an obligation to notify of the risk of the tree. So we do our job of notifying them.
So it
then-
doesn't mention any liability relative to your electrical lines?
No, so basically, if that tree were to fail and fall into the road and kill somebody and they were looking to sue somebody, we would have a letter that says we were looking to remove it and we notified the homeowner of the risk. And
What
it would have to
what
go to
I'm
court at that
specifically
point.
concerned about is if the power goes down and say we lose that circuit for 10 days, and because a tree fell on it that was identified as an inherent risk, you don't know what the town's exposure would be.
I would recommend that you talk with legal counsel.
Okay.
To get a firm answer on that. I mean, if there was broken poles and lots of damages, it is plausible that we could bill you for the damages. Have we done that? No. Do we want to do that? No. That's why we're here talking about the individual trees. But I would recommend talking with legal counsel to find out whether or not that is a risk that the town is willing to take or not. I can't provide legal
I want to make sure that we
representation.
understand that there is potentially some exposure
There could be risk, yeah.
Does MGL give you the authority to do the assessments in the first place?
MGL.
Master no
Where, where do you get the authority, because to go onto somebody else's property? Did you talk to them before you even assessed their trees?
Yes, yeah, so as part of serving power, we are mandated to provide safe and reliable electric service. So as part of that, we will knock on people's doors and ask if we can come on their property, assess
And
their
are
tree.
they informed at that time that they may be liable for their trees?
I don't, we don't
Mr.
particularly
Bittner, if I
say
may
that.
ask, were we,
I'd like
who
to
gives
know that.
permission to Unitil to assess our 32 trees? Does that go through our tree warden?
Yes,
Like, where do they seek permission to actually do it?
yes, yep.
Okay,
The-
just curious.
One other question. You mentioned that you did a storm resiliency program work in another area of town. Where specifically? Mass Ave. What was done on Reservoir Road?
That was before my time. I believe,
The Reservoir Road was not part of the current vegetation management program. That was a reliability project that occurred before this current program.
Okay, thank you.
So the question was, which road had already been in the clear sky? And that was
The
Mass Ave?
SRP
yes,
was
we went
Mass Ave.
from basically Chestnut Street down to South Harbor Road,
Thank you.
To what?
Townsend Harbor Road, sorry.
Townsend Harbor. At this point, I think we're an hour into the meeting and we have not heard from the tree warden. Mr. Rodwikins, have you hopefully got some answers to some of our questions and you can tell us something to make us question more?
This, before I entertain any questions, this is something that I deal with every day. What you're hearing tonight is the passion that people have for trees. They're concerned about the liability. They're concerned about replacement. They're concerned about power and outages. And they're concerned about the aesthetics. So I deal with this on a regular basis. Now, this is a much larger scale, obviously. What I can tell you about these folks, I don't know what's going to happen here with Leominster Road or Lancaster Ave, but I can tell you what has happened. And what has happened in the past is I've had meetings with Sarah, but mostly spoken with Dave. They go out and do the door-to-door that you're aware of. They've really improved that service. And then if there's a concern, and as there is here, I don't know if we'll get to that point, but Dave and I look at every single tree. Every limb, in fact. We discuss, should it be removed? We understand the circuit and the power and the outages. These folks are trying to provide you a service at what cost, you say? Their charge is to provide the service. They're letting you know what, through this assessment, what they feel needs to be done. If you don't agree, don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, you agree, don't do it. let us go along with our mowing and our shrub cutting and trees that are 2 inches or so. Is it 2 inches? 2 inches and below that by law don't need any sort of hearing. I think we're getting away from, and this is necessary discussion, don't get me wrong, and perhaps there's some validity to having the discussion previously, but we're having the discussion now, and should the discussion continue, perhaps, and they'll be happy to come back. What I can tell you is that in 2008, when Unitil got their butt kicked about the maintenance, and they started out rather slowly in 2009, 2010, but since then, give or take a year, somebody's truck, whether it's Asplin or Lucas or somebody, has been parked at the DPW yard almost every day throughout the year. So I don't know about you, and I think when your power is out, it doesn't do you very good. But I know on Arbor Street where I live, and it's fed two kind of ways, and it's subject to power outages because it comes off of Mass Ave at one point. I've had very few. Now that's anecdotal evidence, and maybe some of you have had more outages, I don't know. It would be interesting to, instead of saying perhaps what we're doing wrong here, what are we doing right? Is this making a difference? Is what they're doing making a difference? I tend to think it is. The way they're going to do it now, because of a scenic road, brings up all these questions. So let's get the information. Let's be in agreement or disagreement. Go to the Mass General Law, see who has the authority to do it or not do it, and move forward. I think we've covered it. You know, when I look at every tree, and this gentleman takes me down the road, scenic road or otherwise, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? It's very, very time consuming. But it gives every resident in the town the opportunity to have a say, on every single tree, on every single limb. And you are well represented. Now, with that, questions?
Have you received some of these imminent threat letters?
Threat letters? I get threat letters all the time. What are you talking about?
That the tree is an imminent threat, and it's the notification. We've been informed that if there are trees that are an imminent threat, that the town, in the right-of-way, that the town will receive notification of their determination.
I have not.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Not that I'm aware of. This.
You will receive this notification.
Yeah, there you go.
Saying
Does-
that we have assessed it.
Right.
Which we're just underway now.
Does that go to you?
I haven't gotten this yet, or I think I got it in that whole package that Adam sent. The whole packet, yeah. I know, I feel comfortable the fact that no matter what happens here, and people have their say, which they should, that I'm going to have my day or days with this gentleman here looking at every single tree. And I'm comfortable with that.
If this proceeds, you're going to have a lot more.
There's a lot more of everything, Matt.
Right. I understand.
A lot more of everything.
Have you looked at every single tree already, or that hasn't happened?
No, that has not happened.
Okay, so that
has not happened.
Then my next question would be premature to ask you what your opinion is, and do you concur? So I'll save that. for when you
Generally, in this position, the tree warden that was thrust upon me in 1995, and the stipend is so worth it. It just, the love of it.
It's just like selectmen.
Yeah. Hardly.
How much
Zero.
time do you think it's going to do this, and you have the resources?
Listen, it's everything we do. That's a humor. Have a little humor here. It's everything I do. How much time is this? How much time is that?
I'm just trying
About
to-
20 hours of my day.
And
20
again, hold on, let me finish, because I had requested that we have the ability to possibly hire a third-party tree warden at their expense and our choosing, to offset your responsibilities, so you can keep doing what you're doing. And I had posed that question to them and did not receive an answer.
Well,
And that's my answer.
you're going to hurt my feelings, Gregory.
I'm not
Now,
gonna hurt your
geez,
feelings.
now the first thing comes up here.
Set some of the costs of the town and maximize your time.
Thank you for being sympathetic to my time.
I understand you do a lot for this town, and I appreciate it, and I don't want you to have to do stuff.
You don't want me to be overworked?
I'm just trying to
less. I appreciate your sentiment, I do. I don't think there's a need for that. If you do, then by all means. I don't believe they're going to cover that expense. I mean, we have a professional here, we have a professional here.
That are employed by the company that's trying to increase their bottom line. And let's be honest about that, they both receive paychecks from Unitil. I'm not discrediting their qualifications or their intent.
They,
I'm just saying-
you know what?
It's very expensive.
They,
There's no way that this is increasing our bottom line. It is.
this, I don't understand. Well, I won't get into that. I told myself I wasn't going to be argumentative, but I mean, they'll just go to another road or another. They're here to serve you,
I understand.
okay? They're here to serve you. They're not here to do something you don't want them to do. They won't do it,
I think
I understand that.
okay?
I think that the question that's being asked out here, though, is, so once this assessment is made, right, and we say, you know what, we're not interested in this. We're interested in you scaling this back or whatever. The concern is, let's say that one of these trees, right, does fall on a power line. Are we now in a position where Unitil is going to be giving that homeowner a bill
Well,
for their
that's-
costs, or are you guys going to be giving the town
Listen,
a bill
I think
for
that
cost?
question was well presented by Mrs. Bertram, and I think that point should be well taken by Unitil, and that question should be answered before we do anything here. In fact,
But the answer so far has been talk to our own town council, which is not answering the question we have. What is Unitil's position about this one issue?
Unitil's position is that we do not want to have to send a letter out of liability for damages that occur from a falling tree onto the power lines. That's not the point of this meeting here. The
course not.
point is to have, reliable service. There is a question of liability if something were to happen where, God forbid, somebody was injured or killed, and then there is lawsuits that occur from it, right? So that is what as a town, I would be concerned by, because you did request that we fill out the full assessment of all the trees and provide that to you, so now you're in receipt of all of that. So that does open up a little bit of liability related to if someone were to get injured. As far as us giving a letter to the town about, not doing the trees and billing, that's not in our agenda to do that.
But we will get an inherent risk letter, correct?
There will be, you have already been notified of all of the trees of high risk. And so this process has illuminated risky trees along public right-of-way. So we both have to deal with that.
So the position, though, that we're in, and, I know that a lot of us do remember the ice storm of 2008. And that's on the back of, I think, of a lot of people's minds here, which is, what if, there's this I want to say catastrophic, what if there's a really bad event, and you're out of power for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, as many people were. And I think we all saw Unitil's, what we thought was a slow response, to get out of it. And then it sounds like what you said to me, my question of what has they done for the last 10 years, you started in 2011, so then they waited probably 2 more years to create a program to really get this
Absolutely
addressed.
not. We hit
That's
the
not a
ground
reasonable
running.
deduction. So, but I guess what I'm really trying to understand today, and I think the people at home who are watching this, what they're trying to understand is that as a company, you guys have a different interest than we do as a town. And I think the feeling is that as a company, you're coming to us and saying, and we think you might be going a little overboard. And you're saying, hey, here's this tree, here's that tree, here's this tree. If you don't cut these trees down, we're saying that they're all in a risk. And so if any of them fail, you could have to pay for that cost. It could be on you, it's your responsibility. But for us then to shield ourselves and kind of have this more of a discussion here in which we're really saying, well, is every tree here really that big of a risk here? That on our part, I think the planning board has asked, can you hire someone independently to come for a day and do this? We know that that's about $5,000, $4,000 for a day of someone to come with you and walk down a road at most. And you guys have said no to that. So then we now have to fork over some money if we want to reassess what you're telling us. And then we got to, it just seems that there's another way that we probably could have gone about doing this that would have seemed less like you guys as a company are saying, here's something you don't want to digest, you're going to reject it, but guess what? You're now liable for it. And that's kind of what it feels like.
Unfortunately, I think you don't have the benefit of hearing the previous meetings that we had. So the first step we did was we came in and we said, you know, is this even possible for having on a scenic road? Do you want to move forward with looking at this, right? And the answer was, okay, we really can't make a determination until we see what you're doing. So we had another meeting and we went out and we looked at all the trees together, but we couldn't. Some of the trees, yeah, so to get a feel for what was marked. And the answer was still, we really don't quite understand what you're doing. We want to see a full assessment of all the trees. And that's where we talked about liability and, you know, if we provide all this information, there could be some liability. And it was a determination from that meeting to go forward and mark all of those trees and go there. So it has been a progression. So the initial meeting that we came forward with was, is this even something we want to do? And if the answer was no, all we needed was a statement saying that it does not fit for the town in this area. And that would be what we would provide back to the Public Utility Commission.
But it sounds as if this is something that we do want to do, just not on this scale. And I think that what a lot of us are also thinking is, how about you prune the lines that are already there now? How about you do that? Maybe not every 5 years, but more frequently. And then we may not be in this position where we're talking about cutting down so many trees.
Right.
And so it feels like there's just an element of negligence on,
as a certified
on Unitil's
arborist
part.
and as leading industry, a premier program, the mere pruning of the trees is really not going to solve the problem for major events. It really takes a much larger picture of it. So I published a number of...
But do you have data then that we can not be able to refute that says, hey, we pruned this road, and after we did that, there were this many outages on that road? Do you have data that says that?
Yep, so we have done this program in New Hampshire for 8
I'm
years.
talking about here in Lunenburg.
And here in New Hampshire, or here in Massachusetts, we've done this program. So we've studied the results of the program.
Can
and
you give that data to us?
Sure, yeah. I've published articles that are available to the public on the storm resiliency program, and we've found that it does work. It is difficult to quantify the particular streets because, as you know, each storm is different. All weather conditions are different. And when we had major storms like the ice storm, there was so much damage that it was hard to quantify how many trees failed because the whole circuit was locked out. So we have kind of poor data from when things were really bad. And as they've improved, we've been able to identify individual numbers of tree outages, and we've been able to show that there is some improvement.
I appreciate what you're saying, but I
Yeah.
think that what I'm asking though is a little different than what you're saying, which is, do you guys have data that says, hey, on Lancaster Ave in this circuit, that after we've done a pruning, which is routine every 4 or 5 years, that within the next year there were this many outages along that circuit?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's that type of data that if you give it to us, then we can sit back and say, you know what, maybe this is necessary.
Oh, we do have
'Cause
that.
there
Yes.
Can you give that
Yeah,
to
so we
us?
have all outages by date, by location, and then we have all of the pruning cycle. So we gave a map with all the locations of the outages.
No.
So we have that, we can provide it.
And Ms.
That would be very helpful,
In
an
looking at the
overlay.
poor performing circuit, we laid out every single outage that happened, all the years, all their locations on the map, and when they occurred. And so you can filter them off and on by year to see what occurred when, and we can highlight when it was pruned. There's
I think
not
what
always...
I'm asking for is just something a
Mr.
little
Chair.
more simple, which is just like a map, and then saying, hey, on this year we pruned in this circuit, on this section.
pruned an entire
and these are the
circuit in a
trees
year.
And these are the trees that were failed.
Mr.
afterwards.
Chairs. I don't know who's in charge.
Mr. Allison's meeting, so.
I'm just looking for an opportunity to speak again.
I'm sorry?
I don't know who to ask. I'm just saying,
I was
Mr.
wrapping
Chair,
up.
may I?
Yeah, so we pruned an entire circuit in a
It's
year.
your meeting, so.
So that's something you can provide to us?
Yeah, so we can say like, in 2015, we pruned the whole circuit, or whatever. Dave has the specifics on all of those. He runs the actual
And that could be a
individual.
map that can be distributed to the
Absolutely.
community for people to easily follow?
I don't know about the community because it does have sensitive data of locations of our substation and thing, but we could certainly give a pared down version of where the locations of the outages were and pruning.
That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Ms. Adams?
Sure.
If, just in a second, I asked the land use director if he was going to be available. We have council hours next Tuesday. He said he's not going to be available. I assume that our town manager is going to be at the office hours, can you make a point to ask the questions about liability for the town?
I emailed him while we were sitting here.
Perfect. I knew you would have. I knew you would have. Very good. Okay, so the liability is going to get answered, not necessarily tonight, but Ms. Adams, please.
Okay, yeah, the liability aside, and the trees are protected under the fact that they're part of a scenic roadway, and I think we're really digging into some confusing legal things, like who's liable if a healthy tree falls down and kills somebody? Nobody. Like, I mean, I think we're really going into some weeds here with this tree liability part of it. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, is I think this is just a preference. Do you prefer to have less outages and take down all the trees so they can't fall, or leave the trees and run the risk they may fall and they may not? I would rather keep the trees. Maybe they don't fall, and if they do, we know we can put the wires back. So I think it's a matter of preference. I think you can go through all the data, and it'll still come back from to preference. Even if you showed me data that the power might go out more, I would still choose to keep the tree. So there's a lot of personal preference here. And that being said, because I think we've had a lengthy discussion, from our perspective, I would like to make a motion that we do not grant permission to remove the 32 trees that are on the public land in the scenic roadway.
If I may interrupt, I'm sorry. We have not had public comment
I don't know
yet.
that we're at that point of making any motion yet, because
We
there's
have
a lot
not
of
even
things that
had-
could happen
We
in this
haven't even
meeting.
had public discussion yet.
No.
And there are residents here.
Legally, I can make a motion, right, Greg?
No, I just wanted to mention, no problem.
You do what you want.
Just for clarification, based on this spreadsheet, I think there's 39 trees.
Sorry.
I just counted it. and I'm coming up with 39.
I'm sorry, there is a motion on the floor.
Is there a
Oh,
second?
part of the motion is
Was there a second
32
to that
trees,
motion?
and there's 39.
First of all, it's a selectman
on,
motion.
yeah,
There's no
that's-
motion on your floor. It's a selectman motion. It's
Your
not a
meeting
joint
your meeting is open as well.
Right, but it's not a joint meeting.
So, can we address
I mean,
the
we're
motion
meeting
first?
separately about the same
Either
issue.
chair, can we address the motion?
Was there a second to that?
Well, I'm not, I guess I would be happy to second it for discussion, but I wonder, is it just too early in the process to have the motion?
Yeah, I'm not gonna take a vote on it for a long time, because I wanna hear a lot of other stuff. Because this hearing could be continued, we haven't heard public comment, there's just, I mean, I think there's a lot of information.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, my recommendation would be to hear from the public, and before we do anything, to continue this public hearing for additional information. I would disagree with the former speaker in that we're getting down into the weeds. We now have on record correspondence from the electric company relative to the health of certain trees that I think that now becomes a potential liability, and I certainly would like clarification from town council. I'm certainly not qualified to say that. I need information. When you talk about replacement trees, there's no data on what trees specifically you're replacing. So understanding what trees you're proposing to replace, what you're proposing to replace them with, where they're going to go, there's just not enough information. As far as the potential impact or of keeping these trees, we don't have the data that we need. The schedule on the outages, the specific information on the circuit, there's a lot of data missing. I do share Mr. Bittner's comments that he would like another entity to take a look at the trees. I think that would be extremely worthwhile, and I don't know how we would go about doing that. I do have specific questions relative to specific trees, but given the amount of time we've spent on this and given the amount that we don't have all the information we need, I'm not sure it makes sense to go into that. I can certainly email that to the land use director, the planning director and land use director, and then that he can forward that to Unitil. But I would like to hear from the public, and I'm certainly not at a point from a scenic road perspective that I would be making a motion or recommending that we vote. I think we need more data.
I would agree with that. And so, after almost an hour and a half, is there any public comment? Of course. Okay. We've already lost one member of the public. Did he relay any comment that he wanted you to pass on? Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Sorry, she needs the podium.
I'll just stand here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Okay. So I live on Lancaster Ave, Sarah Kammer, 304 Lancaster Ave. I'm not in your current resiliency area. I'm just down the street. And I've been listening for, what is it, an hour and a half? Yeah. And what I'm hearing is one plan, not a plan with many options to choose from, a plan that we must accept or accept liability if we reject any part of it. And that, to me, is not a community partnership that's serving us for the greater good. And when I looked at the plan of trees that were being cut down, for example, poles 8 through 9 on that document, it read 2 maples. Over pruning would reduce the structure. 2 red pines, 20 to 30, tree to be removed because of proximity to lines. 2 Norways, due to the proximity to lines, they were 24 to 30 inches in diameter at breast height. And then a maple would be pruned or topped. And almost all of those, to me, just looking at the information I had, which we've already discussed, they were being removed because the lines, they were in proximity to the lines. And there's more than one way to get power to a residence. Lines have been put underground before. And if we're looking at cutting down an entire span between pole 8 and pole 9, aren't there other options that we could consider maybe? And I'm thinking of it when it comes down the road, because I have lived in Lunenburg after the ice storm to current day, and I've noticed that the power line T's going across are getting further and further apart, wider and wider, longer and longer, to the point I have a pine. I don't know how many years it's been there. It's pretty sizable. The wire is about this far from the tree, and that's recent. And I'm sure that tree will be on the chopping block, and it's a beautiful tree. And my property extends all the way down the road around the curve, and I was fine with buying that property because it is on a designated road where the trees are protected. So I would like to see some effort at protecting those trees. Now, I'm happy to see trees that are damaged, that are in bad shape, getting chopped down, because there was a benefit for a silo collapse, and I went to Hollis Hills like many of the community, and I came home and I couldn't get to my house because a tree from the other side of the road fell across, knocking down a power line, and there was a live wire. So I totally get that. But I think we have more options than what was presented here, and we're not getting any option A, option B, option C. And one of the things I would like to see put into this discussion, you can look up lots of different trees and how much water they take and stormwater runoff and keep out of our roads, for example, by going to something called iTree. It's a free software. Everybody can get on it. And you can type in iTree and look at my tree. You can type in your address. You can type in the size of your tree, the type of your tree, and you can find out how much water it takes in. You can look at how much CO2 it takes up. You can look at all the benefits that tree has. And when you do that, for example, the maples that are being chopped down, if they're dying, they still take 28 gallons off the road. If they're in good shape, they take 214 gallons off of our runoff. And that is a big problem we are going to have to deal with in this town with the MS4, stormwater runoff. So just going along 10 feet along the road and chopping down every tree that's in the way is not forward thinking in my mind. I guess everybody can disagree with me, but I would like to see some options rather than just cut. Thank you.
Can we respond to public comment? Excellent. I definitely agree.
I'm sorry.
I'm responding to
I just
public
have a
comment.
question,
Okay.
and I want to go through procedure, because the previous speaker talked about that we either have to A or nay this plan as in its entirety, but I'm assuming that of the 32 trees that we're being asked in the public, we can certainly go through which ones we want to be part of the plan and not. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I was going to say in response. It's not really, of
All or
one
nothing.
plan or all or nothing. We are here to start the discussion. There can be an infinite number of options. Obviously, you'll get the most amount of benefit following through with the plan as recommended, because we are looking, at reliability related to trees, but it's not a perfect scenario. We're talking about a scenic road. So those are where the choices come in. And, as a partner, we are here having these discussions so we can figure out what is the perfect plan for the road here. So we are definitely very open to hearing all about each individual tree, what the adjacent homeowners are, and that is a decision that, we all can make together to be a partner in this program to improve reliability and still have a nice, healthy urban forest.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I want to reiterate my support for some comments that were made from the stage tonight and also from the table here, is that, number one, I think that we don't have enough data. Number two, the data that I feel I don't have, liability aside, the data I don't have is, and I think Mr. Bittner made this point, and I would concur, while I have full understanding and full reliance upon Unitil and their professionals to do what they think is in the best interest of Unitil insofar as the narrow scope of power goes, I think there's a broader discussion that has to be had, and I think it's very important, and I would certainly would like to discuss among our board about the ability, even if not at on their bill, but on our own tab, that we get an arborist to go through these and really see if we concur. And maybe there are trees that are like, this one we don't concur, that this is marginal and we can do other things with it. And the reason I want to take that is because A, it is a scenic road, and B, the trees that we're talking about, they're 80, 100 years old. You make a mistake with that, you have to wait another 100 years for that thing to grow. That is not a mistake I want to make. We had that when somebody cut into the road on Lancaster Avenue, and we had a whole hearing when they cut down 4 trees for, to make a driveway. I think we have to take it slowly, and if it takes longer than people want, fine. I want to address liability by have our own arborist look at it and then have us evaluate it. And once we have that, I would truly entertain Lunenburg, the Unitil coming out and do a walkthrough. This 32, it's not that long of a stretch from here to Rolling Acres, and how far down Leominster does it go? To West Street. We could take an hour and a half and go through a walkthrough so we can go talk about each tree. That would be great.
We did have the benefit of doing that, and that was very...
Only on a couple of them.
Yeah, but it was very helpful, because,
Yeah.
some of them are obviously a threat. They're dying, they're like falling.
Right, and I would concur probably on some of them. So
right.
I would
And
I would like to
even
see
as
it
tree
continue.
owners, they're your trees, you should look at them and decide whether or not you want them taken down.
Absolutely, and that's why we use that form. So if you hire someone, they can...
No, is there any further public comment? Please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just briefly, Bonnie Reynolds, 91 Lancaster Ave. Dave has been to our door a couple of times, and I appreciate the information that we've gotten about the trees in front of our home. We live 5 houses down on the left from Whiting Street, where it crosses, and we have very tall trees in front of our house that I have had concern in the past in major storms as to whether one might land on our house someday. I appreciate all the effort that has gone on so far and the scrutiny Paula has put into examining all the data and the recognition that we have these magnificent trees throughout the center of town and along many of the roadways. And I would just really appreciate a selective process so that we could really make informed decisions on some of these major trees. Dave has pointed out that there's a tree in front of our house that, that I can understand that it maybe should come down, and I'm in favor of that. There's another tree that they recommended to be taken down that I am very reluctant to see. I'm not convinced. I would really appreciate a third party coming around with that. The light trimming, I think we talked about light trimming, and I'm very confused about what light trimming is, which sounds not so bad, versus ground to sky clearing. And somebody did talk about removing all the limbs on one side of a tree, and how stable is that for the tree? You know, and are there certain criteria? Is there data out there that, you know, if the branch is up higher at a certain angle, chances are pretty good that it's going to be stable, so that we have some of that graceful effect. When you come up Lancaster Ave, there's already been a lot of trimming back, and you come up and you see those wires. They're just pretty predominant right now. I can't imagine what the center of town, the approach would look like coming up Lancaster Ave. So there's only 32 white ribbons on trees, on public trees. There must be hundreds of them on, if you look at a couple hundred.
Oh, what's the total number?
If you count the private trees too. I've not had the benefit of that, and probably a good thing. But it just appears to be, there appear to be a large number of magnificent trees that are at huge risk. So they're not, if they're on private property, I can't speak for those homeowners. But I do, I mean, this is maybe getting in the weeds a bit because it's a ways to go. Thank you. But I don't really think so. We spoke about replacement trees, and the homeowner would have a choice of type of replacement trees, and I asked what they would be. I didn't have a list of them, but one of them was a redbud tree. Well, redbud trees are very pretty, but they're definitely decorative, and I would be just reluctant to see in the center of town, you know, in the historic district, scenic byways, whatever, that we have removed these beautiful old trees and we plant haphazardly redbud trees. The private property trees to be removed could go anywhere on someone's property. So I guess I would be in favor of looking at what are the types of trees that would be replacement trees, that there would be a minimum size for them, and there would be some kind of a warranty, because I just think it's horrible when you see plantings, you know, some new construction goes in and everything looks pretty for the first season, barely, and then there's a bunch of dead trees and shrubs and nobody ever maintains those, and they really look ugly. So for the ice storm, we had survivor guilt at 91 Lancaster Ave because we got our power back so relatively quickly. So power loss in that section was addressed very rapidly comparatively to the rest of the town. So I just question, when you talk about the number of power outages, how many of them are actually traced to those trees in the center of town versus trees in the whole circuit? Thank you. By the way, it's been a pleasure working with Dave, but I just have a lot of questions that remain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to answer your question about the totals on these two sheets, there's a total of 72 trees, by my count, there's a total of 72 slotted to be on the list, and there's a total of 23 replacements, which is exactly one replacement to 3 removals. So, further comment?
Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me know that it wasn't just this plan or nothing, because it sounded like if we weren't in favor of the plan as presented, then you were going to go back to the public utility and say they don't want it and we're not doing it. That's what that statement was. Mm-hmm. I understand we'll have some options on the trees, but it's pretty aggressive to hear, well, if you don't like this, we're going back to the public utility and we're done.
Yeah, just give us a letter. Just give us a letter.
Yeah, so, you know, if you are willing to discuss things, I suggest maybe in the future that is not the statement every time we ask a question about things.
I'm going to ask another time for public comment. Anybody else have public comment? Okay, I have been requested.
Yeah, just to clarify with our alternate methods, I asked specifically about this issue at our first meeting, and I asked for you to produce a matrix that would basically allow us to take the 10% worst or 20% worst, and you said that was not an option. So
Yes, so I guess I would
what-
like to clarify that statement there. We spend a lot of time and effort into going forward with the storm resiliency program. And there is a sort of I don't know if it's a minimum is the right word to say, but there is a number of threshold that we have to reach in order to actually get results from the program. So what would not be beneficial would be to spend a lot of time and effort going through this whole process and then getting a minimal number of tree removals, because then, you know, the time and the cost to do all of that and the actual performance and the results from it are very low. So that's one of the reasons we came in and we wanted to discuss it. So, you know, if the feeling is that we're really not going to be approving a large percentage of these trees, then it's probably best to not perform the storm resiliency program as intended on those circuits. That doesn't mean that we can't do some hazard tree removal, and some of the things that we've identified, you know, could come down as part of our regular tree program. We do removals and pruning as part of our regular maintenance work. But there is a threshold where we have to say, does this meet the criteria for the storm resiliency program? So that's where we need your input as to whether or not you want to go forward with a majority of these trees. And they are all listed as fairly high because of the proximity they are on the circuit and how many customers are served. So that automatically puts them.
They're all high.
And Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Yes.
I wanted to get a definition from Unitil for storm resiliency program, and that went to the previous question, is that program clear cutting, or basically doing the 10-foot from lines ground to sky clearance? Because I think I would amend my motion, but I think what we're getting at here is that this whole plan means everything.
Yeah, so the storm resiliency program, there's a definition of it as provided, so if you look on
But can we read it out for everybody?
Sure. The storm resiliency program is a companion to the pruning and hazard tree programs where outages have occurred on the backbone or the main line from substation to the next protective device, feeding less than 500 customers and critical town infrastructure, i.e. schools, police, fire, shelters, and town-city emergency management centers. The goal of the program is to reduce the vegetation near the lines to be able to restore power more efficiently during medium to large storm events, so we can focus on getting the outlying customers repaired quicker. It focuses on 10 feet of clearance from the outmost phase on the pole to the side and clearance from ground to sky. We also look at residual trees for defects that could cause the tree to fail in a medium-scale storm. Because we follow the best practices in the arboricultural standards, if we are removing 25 to 30% of live crown to gain the ground-to-sky clearance, we look to remove that tree. We achieve customer approval for all work using staff that is trained and works for Unitil. So the difference between this program and the other program is that, you know, above it there it talks about the other program, which is 10 feet to the side and 15 feet overhead. So there are definite differences between the two programs.
So I guess the question from the public commenters really is, if we want to get into more of a highly specific approach, we're not doing the storm resiliency program.
Yes, if we're talking about one tree on the tree common that we want to put a management plan for, we're talking about a tree on a particular curve that's scenic, those kinds of things we can take. But if we're talking about, I don't want 50% of these trees on this list removed, then we're not really doing storm resiliency
Because I
work.
think then we can get to a point tonight where that this might not be the right path, and we work on a different path rather than kick the can and keep this path alive.
Correct.
If this
I mean,
isn't
I would
where
just
we're
hate
headed.
to spend all the time to put all this together and mark all of them, and then we just decide it's not a right fit.
Mr.
I can support, oh,
Yeah, if I may. So yeah, basically just to go off of Katie's point, could we do, so say we came in at a percentage that was unsuitable for the storm resiliency program, could we do a modified version that would fall under your pruning and?
So we have proposed.
Because I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't be in favor of the full thing. I think, and I had specific concerns at the last meeting regarding the quality of the infrastructure we're trying to protect, and I did specifically ask about a certain pole, and I was wondering if you had that information, the age of that pole?
Yeah, so we passed on that information about the poles, and there is a full inspection of poles. So there is information on those poles that we can pull. I did not bring it with me tonight. I didn't know you wanted it specifically back today, so I apologize for that. But we can provide that for you.
And again, just to go off of Ms. Adams' point again, I think maybe not a full-on vote, but maybe we could take a straw poll to see whether we should move forward or not.
Sounds reasonable.
Mr. Chair, if I may? I again would stress that I don't think that we have enough information. The description of the trees that you've given us, the majority of, actually all of them are, well, no, I would say the majority. There's a couple, Norway spruces, red pines, that it's strictly their proximity to the power lines that you're proposing to remove. But a lot of them have been identified as having decay or high risk because of health issues. My question is this simply, and it goes back to Ms. Adams' point, is this simply 10 feet from the power line the tree goes, regardless, whether if it's healthy
Absolutely
or
not. No.
Okay, so I just want to be very clear, it's not strictly the proximity to the power line.
No, only those cases where it says the proximity of the tree means that, like I had read, over 25 or 30% of the crown would have to be removed. Therefore, the tree would be put under extreme stress and likely to not survive. So we would look to remove it instead, because that's proper
So does
arboriculture
that mean
practice.
tall trees would inherently be prone to being taken down?
No, it means the location of the trunk related to the crown. So if your trunk is very close to the power lines and the crown goes up and over the power lines, then it's likely that a large percentage of the crown will be removed.
All I can think of is Townsend, and I don't know, I drive around Townsend a lot, and it was like, what is happening here when it first started, and I don't want to see that in the center of
Had a
town.
pretty big impact.
I
So
can speak to a specific tree on Leominster Road just before you get down to Cross. It's on the opposite side of the road from the power lines, and I believe it was marked to be removed. So that it is an example of something that's not within the proximity of the lines that they were talking about.
Correct. We go out as far as the tree is tall in order to assess, if the tree is 100 feet tall and we're 50 feet from the power lines, we will assess that 100-foot tree because it could fail and hit the power lines. The farther away you go from the power lines, the likelihood of the tree falling on the wires is less. There are also other modifiers such as slope and soil that are all taken into account, which is what there's a modifier piece on the chart.
I understand. And Mr. Chair, and it's this confusing meeting because I don't know who to ask to talk, but I think I'm just going to keep going back to the fact there's a lot of personal preference here. And another thing I think of, we can only be so prepared. And so whether they're very rare, tornado, but a microburst, a 1938 style hurricane, there's so many things that are beyond the scope of what this would protect us from that I feel like we could have a lot of power out even if we took these trees down.
Absolutely.
So I just am not sold on a benefit because the things that are going to take away our power aren't necessarily directly related to just a tree being there. It could just be hurricane force winds. So I just don't buy that this plan really gives us enough benefit to destroy the landscape.
Yeah, we've seen an increasing number of damaging storms in the last year since 2011, which is why we put together the Storm Resiliency Program that was approved by the Public Utility Commission as a response to public outcry to losing power. So that's the only reason we put it together, because people don't want to lose their power, and there are real life-threatening situations that happen when people do lose their power. So I agree with you.
Thanks to the ice storm, we all have generators now.
I agree with you. We cannot prevent all tree-related outages from occurring.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one question? I'm confused about how many trees altogether are going to be taken down, public and private.
Like 70.
72, is it 72 plus 32?
No, not all 72 are being removed.
No, the majority of them are.
So how many trees is your program suggesting be cut down, public and private combined?
For today, in this hearing, for a portion of the work, we are looking for 32 public trees.
Yeah, right, I got that.
Okay.
But I mean private trees, plus how many other trees?
The only ones we have listed here are private trees that have pruning as well. So we don't have a full list of private trees. Those are our private homeowners. We didn't bring it for discussion today.
But keep in
Do you have a
mind,
number, Dave?
this is just
I want to know how many trees you're suggesting come down, public or private, in total.
another thing that a
we don't have
spreadsheet
a
would help with, just.
But I think the important thing too to remember that this is just from Lemonster Road to Rolling Acres. That's a lot of trees in a very small space, so that's going to be very dramatic.
Yeah, no, I totally
You know, like
agree,
if it was
but
32 trees from the center of town to like
Right, we still
far
have a
away,
second
but this
phase
is
to
a
go
really
through. So
dense-
this is
No,
meeting.
I mean, even just the area we're talking about, I want to know how many trees altogether they're suggesting be cut down, public plus private, because obviously you have to take that into consideration, because when you look down the street, you don't go, oh, well, that's public and that's private. I mean, the overall look is affected.
Right.
The
This
aesthetic
meeting was
impact.
for the public trees, so we did not come prepared to talk about all the individual private trees, so I apologize.
Ms. Black?
I definitely could get behind some modification here, even though right now I am not in favor of this. But, hopefully you guys, I think, I don't want to talk in circles here, so hopefully you guys have gotten some notes from us for the things that we were requesting, so that way we can, buy into whatever the plan is. And I think that Selectman Luck just, brought up a good point, which is that we're talking about 32 trees on town land, but you guys are cutting down 150 trees. It changes our discussion about those 30 trees. So it would be helpful, even if we didn't necessarily know
Right.
what all of them were, how many there were.
So those individual homeowners have the decision of whether or not they want to take those trees down. And we have not fully completed all of those conversations yet. So it's obviously, it's a work in progress. This is stage one of additional down the road. We can provide information as we have right now.
Mr. Ellison, are some of the private trees in the scenic, how does that work? Are they
I'm actually trying to tally them, but I'm also trying to get a notice for Ms. Bertram to speak. She's been trying for
Okay.
4 or 5 comments, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question that I have is, I'm getting mixed messages about the storm resiliency program. I'm hearing that we can have discussions about the trees, but at the same time, if we do a lesser percentage, we're not really following the program, so therefore Unitil's going to say the program doesn't work, and we're going to have to give you a letter saying we don't wish to pursue the program. And I'm also hearing that the reason you're doing this is because of power outages, but at the same time, I'm hearing that the DPU is requiring that you tell them what you're doing to address your poor circuits. So you're doing this because you have to, because this is one of your highest performing poor circuits, your most poorly performing
It
circuits.
is the worst performing circuit.
So there's a reason that we're going about this, not simply because of power outages, because it's a mandate. But I'm also hearing, and I'm a little concerned about this, is we have a public hearing where we're hearing from residents that we, it shouldn't be an all or nothing approach, and I think you're hearing from all of us it shouldn't be an all or nothing approach, and I certainly don't think it should. And I think that Chairman Alonso's suggestion that we hire an outside party to look at these results absolutely makes sense. And if you recall, I was one of the ones who advocated very hard for a site visit before we move forward with the next meeting. I think seeing the trees, and we only had an opportunity to look at a few of them in the common. We didn't get a chance to walk the whole route because we ran out of time. But I think actually looking at the trees and seeing them makes sense. But I'm very concerned about your comments about, well, if we don't do this high percentage, then therefore the program doesn't work. What is your threshold? When Mr. Cole talks about a threshold, I think that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. So a couple of things. The walk was fantastic. I definitely advocate for a walk. And if you'd like to hire an arborist to review it, we've provided information. We can be available to go with them. We will accommodate any of those things that you'd like to do. So that's no problem. As far as the percentage goes, and that's a tricky conversation because at what point are we not getting a true benefit? So I will speak from experience. We've done this program in many places. Depending on where the trees are and how severely compromised the trees are, how much risk the trees are, really makes the difference. So if we're going through the list and we see like a codominant tree that has large branching, and we see that there's decay in the middle of the tree, that's a sign that this tree will fail more than maybe just the fact that it has to be over-pruned or it has some crown loss and some dieback. So it's really the type of defect and where it's located, which would be the tipping point for saying if these particular trees are not allowed to be removed, we would not see the benefit of the program. So I would suggest that look through the list of trees and decide how you feel about each one of those trees, and we would be able to make a determination as to whether or not we would be fulfilling the scope of the work, and we could have a two-way discussion about why that particular tree is necessary to get the reliability benefits, and we are definitely willing to continue conversations about the program.
So that's why I think having a third-party arborist take a look at them from both the planning board's perspective and the town's perspective would be extremely helpful, because then we can either agree or disagree and then come to a determination. But I want to be clear, I mean, when you talk about removal, there's some that are because of their proximity, but the majority that were identified, you identified defects in the trees.
Correct.
But to be clear, all of them, every tree is identified, it looks by default, it's X'd off under high impact on every sheet with the computer versus the handwritten sheet.
Correct.
So it seems to me that there was already a prevalence that they were all going to be considered high impact. So
the way that the sheet reads is likelihood of failure, likelihood of impact, likelihood of failure and impact and consequence.
Okay.
So the likelihood of impact is always high because the target doesn't move. The power lines stay there always. So if you have likelihood of impact for a pedestrian or a car, those can vary because there's not always a pedestrian there.
They can move, they can be buried.
Right, we could bury lines, yes. And if that is something the town wishes to pursue, we can certainly.
Does likelihood of impact go to a healthy tree too?
Yes, yeah.
It's the ability of
So even a healthy tree is condemned just based on its location?
No, this is only saying likelihood of impact is high. Then you put the likelihood of failure with the likelihood of impact, and you get unlikely, somewhat likely, and very likely. So this is a standard arborist form. Any arborist you would hire would be able to look at this and read the matrix of it. This is not something we made up.
No, I didn't suggest that.
Yep.
What's the distance from Leominster Road to Rolling Acres? Is that like a mile or half a mile? Or?
It's just shy of a mile.
So in that stretch, I guess one question I would have in terms of a certain diameter and above, how many trees would be left? How many large trees would remain?
If you have a tree inventory, we'd be happy to correlate it with the town tree inventory.
Because that would be sort of an interesting way to, like, if there were 40 trees in that stretch.
Yeah. I think we're making this way more complicated for tonight, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I feel, and I think a lot of people have said, there's not enough data for us to make a decision. Now, you've said, well, we can, from the town's point of view, we can decide that this is not for us. We're saying that, at least I'm saying as one person, I'm not ready to say that, unless you're saying that if I take, if I say I take 8 trees off the 32, you're not going to do it. No. I don't know that I'm going to take 8 trees. I don't know that I'm going to take 1. I may take 24 off. I have no idea, because I want to see what somebody else has to say, and I want to see the trees. So, to me, I think we should continue this to get the data, and I think the motion here, I'm personally not in favor of, because I don't think I have the data to say yes or no. I'm willing to work with Unitil to take trees that are clearly, if all of us agree, this is a dangerous tree, it's rotting, we need to take it out. But I'm also not going to go wholesale, all 32 have to go. I have no way of saying that.
The other option is to work with the tree warden, as we've done in the past, is to give approval to work one-on-one with the tree warden. As he was up here speaking before, he reviews all of them and makes a decision. Then you don't have a need to hire another arborist. We are happy to work with whoever you feel in the best interest for the town. That's why we're here. But another option would be for Dave to ride, with Jack and look at all of the trees and
I'd certainly
bring
prefer
it back.
that you guys hire the arborist, but I mean, I don't know if we want to. I'm not comfortable delegating that responsibility right now of figuring out the condition of all these trees. I think that we just need more information.
Unfortunately, we can't hire an arborist because we have.
Yes, you guys are 2 arborists. Yeah,
right,
but
and for ratepayers,
interest,
it doesn't make any sense to hire
then
on behalf
I think
of
it's
the
on
town.
us. But regardless, I think that tonight we're all.
It would not be a prudent.
agreement.
It would not be a prudent expense, and it would not be approved from a public utility commission. So,
Just can't, I don't like that word.
it would not be a wise choice for Unitil to use ratepayer money to hire an arborist to review work that 2 certified arborists have already
To
approved.
convince us that your storm resiliency program is a good idea.
If the town chooses to hire their own arborist to corroborate what we have
I
decided to do, that is fine. But it is not best use of ratepayer money to be hiring an additional arborist on behalf of Lunenburg.
Taxpayer money, so I'm weighing one against the other.
Yeah.
John DiNapoli again. Maybe a way, as it's a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen as well as the Planning Board, we've heard there are a lot of questions that are out there. Would it be fair to us to ask you to put those questions together and provide them to us, so when we come back and meet next time, we've been given a list of specific questions, and those are the questions that we're going to answer to the best of our abilities, and hopefully the best of the ability for you as board members in both the respective boards, and then work from there to come to a conclusion of, yes, I agree, out of the 32 trees, 28 should be removed, or nope, we only want to do 4, and then we can work it from there. But to go back and forth, because we can meet again in 2 weeks, and then you're going to come up with other questions that weren't raised today. We're just wondering, to help speed it along, would it benefit both of you to ask both boards together to send us a joint, hey, this is what we really would like to see, so you become better educated as well as yourselves, as are we, because we're going to get our engineering group together to formulate all the data, the percentages of outages, et cetera. We want to be able to give you the information you seek, so you become educated in order then to make a vote, yes or no, or...
Mr. Chairman?
Certainly can appreciate that, but typically, when people come to both of these boards, they come with either lawyers that are suing us, or lawyers that are being sued, or engineers representative of the client, or someone who is taking notes as to what has been asked of them to fulfill their request at the podium. So this will be recorded on YouTube, and I mean, we certainly can follow up with the notes that we have taken, but I think it will behoove you to at least review the YouTube meeting.
I concur.
Mr. Chairman? While I appreciate your point, personally, I think there's a couple things that need to happen. I would like the trees reviewed by an independent arborist to corroborate your results. I would like to see these assessment forms identified with poll numbers, because you're trying to figure out which sugar maple you're talking about. Some of them have addresses, some of them don't. So trying to match this to the description is extremely difficult. I think that's information we could provide to an independent party. I also think that you've heard from a couple people that they would like to walk the areas. I think before we have another meeting, we should walk the areas once we have those independent results. So while I'm certainly happy to provide you, I do have a few pages of notes on specific trees. I'm certainly happy to provide that to you, but personally, I think that there's additional data that we need relative to the trees themselves. And I've also heard that we're looking for the data that you have as to the frequency of outages, the impact that these trees have to that circuit. As the chair said, I think that information is readily available. Hopefully, you've captured those questions. So I think that there's additional information we're requesting from you. There's additional information we are looking to gain ourselves so that we can have a more informed discussion at a future date.
Just out of protocol, is this something you would then just say we table for a further discussion? I'm not sure of the process.
Has to be date certain. Has to be date certain.
Yeah, we have to continue to
If you
date.
don't want to have to re-advertise, we would have to continue to a date certain. If Unitil's willing to pay the cost of advertising again, we could continue indefinitely until time was determined. What can be done is a date could be picked. You could continue to that date if site walk, independent arborist, whatever hasn't happened at that point. You could communicate a request for a further continuance to another date certain, and that would avoid the advertising requirement, and the board could continue the hearing without the need for Unitil to be present to communicate the desire to continue. So let's say you said, look, we think we can probably get this nailed down in a month. Let's continue to the first planning board hearing in September. We continue to that date, and for whatever reason, our arborist doesn't get something back, or you get the report back from the arborist and you're still working on it, we can find a date to which we could further continue.
Well, on that regard, we can only be aware of and control what is ours.
Correct.
If you're hiring your own arborist, that's nothing we have control over.
Correct.
But
And at that
I
point,
mean,
we would communicate with you and say, listen, this is where we're at, and are you okay with us continuing further? And we would just want some consent.
Are we up against any kind of timeline?
There is no timeline on
Scenic
roads.
Okay. Could we ask for just a couple minutes, because I'm not sure. I don't want to put this on you for tonight. Is that something that we could consider? So could we just take a couple minutes and then come back?
Sure.
And then go with protocol?
The tree warden is requesting to speak again, so if you want to hear
well,
that.
Jack, well, Jack speaks, we can just confer for a
Okay.
second.
Before, we have a motion on the table. While they're conferring, can we take care of this motion?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to withdraw the motion so I don't complicate things, but I just wanted to summarize the fact that the storm resiliency program doesn't match what I think most people are feeling or what the public commenter said. And I think that's important to point out is we probably all want to do some portion of this, but by definition, the storm resiliency program is a really wide scope project, and we're probably, when they say you can remove 28 or 4, well, if we remove 4, we've fallen out of what we're talking about.
that's what
We're
we're
not
trying to
in the
work out.
storm
We're trying to work out
resiliency
those
program.
details.
So I'll withdraw that motion because I don't
Withdraw your
want to
second?
make tonight confusing, but I mean, my sentiment will be that I will continue to not support this.
Thank you.
Mr. Rod Wilkins, please.
It seems like we're wrapping up here. But before we do, in 2015, the Board of Selectmen, I petitioned the Board of Selectmen to do a hazardous tree survey townwide. That actually went somewhat to litigation. There had been an incident in Situate, I guess it was brought to someone's attention. Unfortunately, the tree killed people, and then there was a whole litigation there. But this townwide tree survey done by 2 certified arborists in 2015 has about, and it's very hard to read, it's got about 20 trees on Lancaster Ave. So I think what I'd like to do is cross-reference what Sarah has, and certainly if it was noted by third party in 2015 that if it was a hazardous tree in 2015, it's likely in 2019 it's still a hazardous tree.
If it's still standing.
So we may be able to streamline it, get that number down. And this is at least in part what you're looking for for a third party.
Very good. Thank you.
Possibly saves money.
So to answer a question that came up about private trees, so because they're asking for 32, there's 72, there's 40 private trees listed on here, I missed one. But of the 39 that I did count, 16 of them private to be removed, 12 of them to be determined, not mentioned, whether or not removal, trimming, or, I think those are the only 2 options. 6 individuals refused, and 5 were trimmed.
5 were what, I'm sorry?
Could be trimmed. And again, I missed one, so.
Having totals would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think the selling point for me really is comparing what the outages are in areas that are trimmed and how many trees are going down in those areas. Because if we know that there's 0, which is what I suspect, then I think there's nothing more to talk about.
No, I will take this opportunity to refresh our group and let you know that when the first meeting that we had, I believe, was right after the walk that we took. And the suggestion at that meeting was made that we not start in the town center, that we look at the option of putting the power underground, especially for these very high use lines, these primary lines, and especially at least in the gazebo area. These options were mentioned numerous times, and they chose to continue doing the analysis wherever it was that they've done it, which results in what we've got tonight. So just more information.
Thank you.
Yes.
If we understood correctly, if we seek a continuance till, you said the first week, you can't do the second Board of Selectmen joint planning board meeting in September, that's, if we do that now, we don't have to do an advertisement, is that
Correct. This would, the continuing to the date certain would be considered the advertisement. If you said, oh, we're not really sure when we want to come back, then we would have to do the whole advertising protocol.
No, if we can do it to the, whatever the second date
The
is.
26th would be the, 26th of September would be the board's.
23rd.
And we can't.
Oh, I'm sorry, it is, 23rd. 26th is the second meeting this month. I wrote it down, 23rd.
And also, we cannot obligate them to have another meeting, but
No.
we can ask them.
Sure, and what we're going to do, we do have our notes, and we'll hope for the best that we provide you the information that we heard that you may be missing, and in hopes at that meeting that, in between there, a walkthrough, et cetera, with Jack and/or your arborist, if you hire one, and then when we come to that meeting in September, based on the work back and forth between us as a partner and the town, that we come to an agreement of whether to move forward, whether it's a modified version, or just do our regular routine trimming that we normally do. We can then hopefully decide by that time.
I just have a couple of comments. One is, at a couple of times this evening, you've brought up the fact that this is the worst circuit. And in my mind, I understand where you may have a threshold for some of these operations. In my mind, though, getting rid of any trees on that circuit is a step in the right direction, especially when it comes to the Board of Public Utilities. If you can go to them and say, we got a lot of resistance, we wanted to remove 30 trees, but we took down 10, that's a lot better than saying, we wanted to take down 30 trees, they wanted to take down 10, we took down 0. That, in my mind, isn't really fulfilling the goal of improving service. And while I understand and respect you need to have a threshold, I feel like if we went through and identified the worst of the worst, that's at least a step in the right direction. I'd be opposed to spending town money on an independent arborist at this stage, because I feel like the ball is in your court. If our independent arborist says, well, I don't agree with these 10 trees, and it drops below your threshold, we've spent the money, got a third-party opinion, but you've chosen not to move forward at all, and that's your choice, and we're out the funds.
We might choose not to move forward with the storm resiliency program. It doesn't mean we would not do the trees. It means that we would use it out of a different bucket of money, because we have very specific regulations about type of money, accounting, and what type of program and type of results. So when you said, 10 trees versus 30, we may still do those 10 trees. It would just not be classified under storm resiliency program. So that's a little bit of
because that's
accounting,
not what you've
housekeeping
said
type of
this
thing.
evening.
And that's why I'd asked the question, and you didn't have the answer, is whether
So,
or not,
the
if we
question on
said
the
no to the
table-
storm resiliency, but could we address the imminent
Right.
threat trees and any other specific
The
trees
question on the
under a
table is
different
whether or not we're
program,
doing
so
the
that you
storm
could spend the
resiliency
funds?
program.
I'm
Yes,
trying to
but-
talk, sorry.
Yeah, but
But if we did it under a different system, then you could use a different bucket of money to spend on
Not
different
for
things.
this year, so that money has already been set aside. It would
Trees, I
have to
don't
be in
think
the
are going
future.
anywhere in a year.
But I think you're kind of shielding yourself behind the storm resiliency program versus this bucket. The way this board looks at it, at least
Absolutely.
from my perspective, is we're looking for an alternative to removing all these trees. And when you say we need a threshold, I interpret that as you saying, we don't meet the threshold, nothing's going to be done.
Nothing's going to be done under the storm resiliency program. We could look at doing additional removals under our regular program, whether they happen, in the fall or they happen, January of next year. That would be to be determined based on, the risk of the trees, and that would fall to me to decide what to do as part of our regular program. As far as our funding for our storm resiliency program and our mandate to do this type of work on a cyclical 10-year program throughout all of our territory, that's what we're trying to decide, whether or not the storm resiliency program is appropriate for this section. It doesn't mean that we won't be back to remove trees that we found that were risky as long as the town approves them. It's just whether or not we're really meeting the criteria for the storm resiliency program at this time.
And part of our information that we took back from what everyone was suggesting, and more towards what Paula was saying, is out of the 32, let us really analyze those 32 and come back and say, all right, whatever the number is, 24 of them are yes, it's a high priority. These 24 really should go. The other 8, for whatever reasons, no. So I think that's part of what we were talking about, or listening back and forth, is get the most eminent threats identified, maybe in a better way, that you're educated, both boards are educated, and the community who are listening or seeing it posted are going to be educated, and then hopefully back in the meeting the second time in September.
So we can come back with a little bit more priority on the list, so you can understand what we think is a high risk. That would be like non-negotiable ones down to, let's talk about those a little bit more, and that may be help you to make some decisions. So that's what we were talking about bringing back.
And part of that can be identified when we do the site walk ahead.
But when you say things like, well, these are non-negotiable, what does that mean?
As far as the storm resiliency program goes, so if there's a high-risk tree right outside the substation that is showing signs of failure.
But you could still take it down under another program.
Right, yes. Yep.
So it is negotiable.
Okay, non-negotiable as far as the full storm resiliency program goes, yes.
I'm
Whether
just
or
trying
not
to
we're
get
gonna continue on
clarification
with the
because,
rest of it.
and I appreciate the thoughts of having an independent third party look at it and doing site walks and so on, but ultimately this comes down to a numbers game. We have thousands of trees in town, and as you continue this program down Lancaster Ave, we've got hundreds of trees to evaluate, and I'm looking for a metric that
Thousands of
says,
customers that are served.
that streamlines this process. We're going on 3 hours in here on a mile of road.
Right, we still have a second section to do, so that,
Yeah, and this is one of, this is our second
Right.
meeting, and we're gonna have a third, if not a fourth. So that's all. I'm just
knowing
looking
what
to.
you would like to see helps us. So giving the information about wanting the assessment was helpful because then we were able to provide full details of what's there. So knowing that you need to have a list of like what are, the main ones we would want to see as part of the storm resiliency program. We
What
can
ones are
provide that.
what ones are being replaced, where they're being replaced.
We'll write a
There's
proposal for replacements, because basically the proposal for replacements is just, we would talk to you about what species you would want, about what size, we would give a ratio up to a certain amount of money, and then you can
Yeah,
choose.
but just knowing which ones would be replaced would be
Right.
helpful.
So it's just, a number of money based on the amount of trees that are coming out. You can choose what size, obviously the size trees and the cost. We balance all of that out. So we'll write a proposal where you can choose all of that, and I think that would be helpful as well. So we'll come back with some of that information.
And if we can get phase 1 done to everyone's satisfaction, phase 2, we hope will be a lot
Exactly.
easier.
Mr. Bernie.
I think there's a couple of things that are important to remember here. The planning board is holding a scenic road hearing. So whether it's storm resiliency program or a year down the road when you take it out of your normal pruning funds, we effectively don't care. The idea is the board okay with this tree being removed from a scenic road? So I think we're not seeing the forest for the trees. We want to focus on, we know there's a tree on the top side of Lancaster Ave that just needs to go away. Everybody knows it, it's dead, it has maybe an eighth of the crown that it should have. And I think it was one of the trees we saw on our walk. The board can go ahead and approve removal of those trees under the scenic road. The tree warden and the board of selectmen can worry about those in respect to the shade tree. And then through that process, you'll have an idea of what this first half or third of your program looks like. And you can decide, okay, we're going to call this storm resiliency, or we're going to call this, oh no, those trees are going to fall down. Let's cut them in our other pool of money. And I think that's really, I think we're so mired in what are we calling it that we need to take one step back and say, why are we actually here? What are we trying to approve? And I think that as we move forward, that's something that we need to focus on a little bit more closely And, you know, whether the ground to sky happens, whether it's storm resiliency or normal pruning and removal, gets worked out through that process. So that's really I think the cherry on top at this point.
So my understanding was that you wanted to continue at the end of September? The second meeting in September?
23rd.
23rd? So we're going to entertain that motion. Is there anything further that you folks would like to add, ask, or say?
I guess, I'm sorry.
I'll come back.
I guess I would
I'll
wonder
come
how
back.
and when we would decide whether to bring in
We're going
if we were
to
gonna.
entertain a motion, so then we can have a discussion about the motion, I think, right?
I would make a motion to continue this, go ahead.
I didn't get an answer.
Okay.
Is there
Again-
anything further from?
No, the only thing is, I think two
Well,
of
that
our
can occur
members
during
are
this
not,
discussion.
I will not be in town on the 23rd. I don't think you will, so, but we can come up with, we can try to provide written things as long as we get the data in time
Yeah.
for the meeting. I don't want it to hold up the meeting. I have a business trip that I will not be
Okay.
around.
Well, can we continue to the
Could we-
14th?
Or to the, I was going to say, to the Board of Selectmen's meeting, we could always go to them.
We certainly could.
Not on a public hearing for scenic road?
It would
Why
still
not?
be.
It doesn't matter when you do it, you just,
Or where?
Okay.
or where.
Okay, I
As
just
long
want to
as you-
make sure
As long as
that,
you have a date certain and you post your meeting and.
as long as the Board of Selectmen are aware that we would have to complete the public hearing. So if it consumed 3 or 4 hours of the
That's-
selectmen's meeting.
That's really the.
I'm just trying to
So
think
it might
That's
not
gonna be a no
be the
for
best
me.
way to do that.
The public hearing again.
What date are you, and what date?
23, September 23?
No, we're looking for an alternate date.
22nd either.
22nd is a Sunday.
I'm sorry, the 24th.
24th I won't be here, either, but we don't, yeah, I would.
The selectmen don't have a meeting.
Okay.
But
They don't
I
meet.
won't be here because I'm on a trip.
So I would like to suggest we move it to October 7th.
That would work.
You also have the option to hold an extra meeting to do it.
I'm
No,
fine with that,
thank
too.
You will miss a meeting in October as you do every year.
I'm okay with myself, I don't want to speak
No,
for
no,
Mrs.
that's-
Luck. I'm okay with not being at the meeting, I don't want to hold up the meeting. I will be able to provide, if we get all the information we ask for, and then we have to talk about the selectmen, if we want to, hire an arborist, or I don't know if the planning board's going to take that up, or we do it together. We can't do it tomorrow because the agenda's already set, so the earliest we could talk about it is next Tuesday. But if we get all that information, I'd be more than happy to supply a written comment of my own feelings about it, so.
Sure. And also, everybody involved, please feel free to send questions, comments to Mr. Bernie so that he can relate that to the client.
So we're still
Yeah.
looking at the September 23rd, because Sarah's away.
It sounds like we're on the fence. You don't mind.
It sounds like they would have a conflict in
On
October.
the 7th.
You would
On
rather
the
do the Okay.
You want the 23rd?
The 23rd works for you, and the BOS is fine with that.
Planning on being here anyways.
So I would need a motion for the continuance.
Again, I just want to make clear, when would the decision be made by the town whether or not we would hire an independent arborist?
Next
Does
Tuesday.
that need to be a joint decision, or, I mean, you guys would assume you hold the purse strings.
hold the
I
purse
assume.
strings, right.
Right, but is it part of our public hearing? Because it's kind of, I see it as like peer review, whether we want additional peer review. So would we need to vote on that?
Do we want to take a straw poll as a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen?
I was gonna say,
And
if you did plan to discuss it with the Board of Selectmen at their meeting next week, we would just post a meeting.
Okay.
And you would be able to have discussion at that point. Unfortunately, this is not, it's like peer review, but it's not peer review. It doesn't fall under the 53G.
I understand that, but I prefer to
requirements.
make the decision tonight. If we can all say, if we have a majority that agrees we should, then why not just do
He
it?
has to provide a recommendation.
Pardon me?
In
He
Tuesday,
provide a recommendation.
Yes.
I just want to point out, too, we haven't done what our tree warden has recommended, which is to use data we already paid for. He said he has a packet there from 2015 that a lot of these trees are already studied, and we haven't looked at that or thought about that, so I think that should come before we hire
But we
somebody.
don't have to act on it. That would just give us the ability to hire one if that was, if that information.
Because
was-
that, I mean, if that sounds like
And
what
I
he's...
appreciate that. I think we should look at it, because I think it would.
And then
cut time off
scheduling
of-
wise, Adam and whatnot, we threw out that we had to talk about earth removal permits, so if we're gonna keep doing this, we should probably talk about everything we need to talk about and pick a date.
That's up to the planning board, not to me.
Yeah, we talked about our earth removal permit process and upcoming maybe fall town meeting, and maybe it's going to go that
Correct,
direction and
the
having
discussion was, once the
conversation.
board has a more polished version of their draft, having a joint meeting.
And I'm just thinking, yeah, so
Trying to
we'll
wrap
try
that
to pick
into
a
the
date where we
23rd.
put all those
Yep.
items on one night.
I mean,
You really want to spend a lot of time with us, don't you?
Yeah, I don't want to hang out with the planning board.
I would make a motion to continue the public hearing to September 23rd at 6:35 PM.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
do we need to nail down this arborist issue?
I think it's a separate, I think it's a separate issue. I think it's a separate issue.
So, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Excellent, 23rd, thank you
Mr.
very
Chair?
much.
Mr.
I move
Chair,
to
I would like
adjourn.
to make a motion that we send a letter of
Mr.
recommendation
Chair,
to the Board of
I move to
Selectmen.
adjourn.
I would make a motion that we send to the Board of Selectmen a letter recommending that we seek the services of a certified arborist to corroborate the results of Unitil's findings following review of the 2015 hazardous tree study.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second, discussion.
I'm not in favor because I feel like we've already got that in, a lot of that information in the hazardous tree survey. And we have a track record of spending money on plans and data and analysis, and we could take that money and go take down hazardous trees that we've already identified.
I think it's just a recommendation. I have faith in their abilities. We can recommend anything we want.
Right. Obviously, if the 20 trees, right, if the 20 trees that Jack talked about are identified as both by that study and this study, we have the answer. But there's 32 trees, so we might need the services of an arborist for those additional 12. So to me, it makes sense. And I understand that you're not in favor of that, but I am,
But
so.
just for clarification, the 20 trees are on the entirety of Lancaster Ave.
Okay.
Not that section.
Okay. So again, I mean, all right, I didn't understand that, so I thought it was that section. So,
I tend to agree with Mr. Cole. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay. So 2 to 4,
2 to 2
2
doesn't
to
carry.
2.
Does not carry.
2, okay, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a recommendation anyway, so.
Just send
There is no recommendation. But you heard our thoughts, so.
We got it.
Let me just close our meeting. I want to entertain a motion that we adjourn our meeting.
Second.
Yeah.
Wow, that was, okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.